Hello everyone, I hope you're having a good day. This is a video update to my previous mod. That was the first version ever. Hopefully the next one will be when the remake gets updated, that I'll just add this to the updated remake version. So for those who haven't seen the previous video, I really recommend you go watch the first 22 minutes or so. That's for the majority of you if you're not a coder and want to learn how I actually added these into the game. But chances are, if you have any questions about this mod, it'll either be answered in the first 22 minutes of that video or in, it looks like, the first 25 minutes of this video. Yeah, so no more than that do you have to watch. And I have loads of bookmarks in the previous video, and as you can see in this video as well, including the installation. But I spent a lot of time on these videos for a reason. I didn't repeat myself. I tried to address everything necessary and so forth. I'm going to just begin this video by showing segments from the previous video and then saying what I changed about it, because I made some changes but then some additions. So without further ado, let's begin. Now the catapult shooting sound is identical to the original game. I found a way to fix it. Not in the way I was hoping, and I'll talk about that soon. I don't know if you noticed what happened here, but this catapult fired way too often. There was a pause towards the end where it was longer, but in general it fired very often. And that's what we call fire exploit. It's actually a bug that I fixed in this recent version, and I'm going to show you that in the next segment. There was a clear pause before they fire again, and they fire at consistent increments each time. In that clip, they're just way too powerful. I based off my calculations from studying one catapult. The goal was to kill between 0 and 3 units with each hit. In that video, I mentioned that it would kill up to 4, but it actually would kill up to 5. But the idea is I wanted to mimic one catapult from the original game because I remember it could kill up to 3. Well, I observed that in the Steam version at least, that it could kill up to 3 at a time. And so I made one catapult powerful enough to do that, and then I extrapolated that to the entire group. And that was a problem, as you saw, because these pikemen, there's 111 pikemen here. None of them were able to kill the catapults to any degree. They were killed instantly, pretty much. But this is the updated version. Let's see if there's any difference. You can pay attention that I start out with 200 here. I just lost 3 there. Let me try this again. Only lost 6 there, but as you can see, they had a chance to get much closer, and I actually lost some now. So that's a big difference. So let's go ahead and see this in the Shadow Kingdom Mission 20. So let's compare that with this. I have the same number of catapults as there, and I have the same exact setup.
Yeah. Forward! Forward! Move! Move! Follow me! Let's go!
Let's see if 8 die at a time, roughly. It looks like it's not a massacre. And I have roughly the same amount of casualties as I did there, even more. But this was a bad run. Let me try again.
Move! Move! Forward! Forward!
So roughly the same amount. Remember, I start with 41 of these. The point is, they killed roughly the same amount of troops at a time like there, and I lost roughly the same amount of units. I could have played a little bit smarter in the remake, but also in the remake, the units come at you faster and more consistent than in the Steam version, and the crossbowmen in the remake are more aggressive. Therefore, that could explain more casualty, but it's not that much more. It's still roughly the same, just to give you a peace of mind that these new catapults are, even in large numbers, well balanced. Comparing with the Steam version, it was roughly the same result, and that's what matters. I have both the catapult and the ballista fire every 6.5 seconds when they're firing at units. When they're firing at buildings, it's every 5 seconds. In the Steam version, when they're firing at units, they fire, I think, every 4.5 seconds or so, somewhere around there. But then there's a moment when they struggle. That's what I'm talking about. When he struggles, there's a delay. And when they struggle like that, that's 10 seconds of a delay instead of 4.5. So let's say it was 10.5 seconds, which is roughly what it was, plus 4.5. And if we were to divide this by 2, that's 7.5 seconds. But that struggle doesn't happen often enough, so we can, if we were to try to average out that delay and take that delay into account in the remake, it would be less. And based on my test, I found that 6.5 seconds is what, obviously as you saw, yields a similar result based on all the other settings that I have for the catapults. Alright, that's the change with the catapults. Now let me briefly talk about what I changed with the ballistas. The changes that I made with the ballista are, I have shortened their range, which I'll talk about soon. And then another thing, 20% of the time, their bolt is not going to kill. It's actually going to completely miss the unit that it comes in contact with. Because in the original game and in the Steam version, sometimes they missed. One thing I mentioned earlier, but it was in a subtle subtitle that maybe you didn't see it, but the projectiles they throw does not hurt you. If you have the siege unit and they fire, it's not going to hurt your units or your buildings like it did in the original game. I also have friendly fire in, so now they can hurt your own units. But they're only going to hurt your own units, and it's going to be the same way for the Catapult too. They're going to hurt your own units 10% of the time by 1 hit point, and they're going to damage your own buildings 20% of the time by 4 hit points, the amount of hit points that they would normally damage buildings with. When I said this about the unit specs,
life slips away.
Well, turns out that the sight is the same as for normal ranged units. The range of the siege units is also equivalent to the other ranged units' maximum range. And this is where I made my mistake. This is what I first used to make that decision. This is the Shadow Kingdom Mission 20, as we all know. They should be able to shoot at him right now because he can shoot at them. As soon as I turn him around, he can shoot at them. If I move 1 forward, which was a lot, but it was just 1 forward, now they can shoot at him. But the same is true for the rogue. If I were just to turn him around, and I go 1 step forward, I mean, I can't even explain this right here, how the 3rd row will all of a sudden fire if the 1st row can. Yeah, so that confused me basically. All you have to look to though is not the complexity of that, but the fact that the rogue could do the same thing as the ballista did that I just showed. And so therefore, they have the same range.
Let's go! March!
I guess you heard the death sound. That's from Age of Empires 2. And this is the same thing from Age of Empires 2 when you select the onager, I guess it's called. And then the scorpion. and when you link them together, any other action you do, it makes that noise. So just something new to add. This is optional for those who are worried about copyright, like the KaM Remake developers. We can make our own sounds. This is just a demo using those. And so there you go. The best unit to counter siege units is the Catapult. This is the previous version of my mod. Take a look at the wheels when they roll. They shake when they go up north. When they go northeast, they look okay. And east, they look okay. Now compare that with this. It's much smoother. This is the one thing that I messed up with. The way they fire and all is going to be the same as it was before, and the way they die is going to be the same as it was before, but the rolling is better now. The shooting side of my ballistas, it's one pitch lower than it was last time. That's because I think for one reason or another, all the sound effects in KaM Remake is one pitch higher than what it should be. And speaking of that, let me pull out my movie trailer voice. This is what I offered you before. This is what I'm giving you now. So it is finally here. But I can't guarantee that there isn't any of these in the code somewhere. And as I emphasized in the previous video about my siege units being genuine, next I'm going to show a side-by-side comparison of the original game Siege Workshop to mine. And you can see that they are exactly the same. But I'm bringing it up now that I just mentioned the pitch for the ballista, because you'll notice that the pitch for my Siege Workshop on the right is a little higher than what it should be. The original game is a little lower. I didn't change that because I would have to change a sound that all the carpenters make in the game, and that changes the remake. Before, when I changed the sounds, it was just the siege units. Let's compare the two and see that they start at the same time, they make the sound at the same time, and they last as long, release the siege unit at the same time, etc. This is close to 90 seconds long, so you have to bear with me, but I'm showing this on purpose to show that they're identical, so you just have to watch through it. If not, just fast forward. But this is just for the artist and the remake enthusiast to closely observe. I am proud to present my Siege Workshop. And obviously the position of the flag is different than it was in the original game, but here's an alternate ending for you. As in, I fixed the flag after I filmed that comparison. The original game runs 0.905 times as slow as real time, and therefore in this video, the reason why they were corresponding exactly is because I slowed down the remake by that much. So in other words, if the remake ticked as slow as the original game, then clearly mine would correspond almost exactly to the original games. And speaking of exactly, have you taken a look at that interface? Yeah, so I have two options here. One that I'm going to release in this mod, and another that KaM himself requested that I do, that it's more compact. So I'm inclined to think that if the remake developers do add this to the game, it's going to be the ×5 version, But I've also gotten opinions from others that the 5 plank and 5 iron bar version is prettier and is more consistent with the other weapon buildings. And I guess you noticed by now I'm emphasizing that the word orders is in there instead of the word delivers, like it usually is. And this will apply to all weapon order buildings when the language is in English, and only then. Otherwise, for right now, it's just going to default to the default for delivers. And just the way I timed the buildings in this video, using the source code itself, it runs for 86.8 seconds. So for the building enthusiast, those who want to make optimal towns and all, and want to take into account how long buildings run, that's the number. One other thing I changed was the army power, or the power ranking of the siege units. In the previous video, when I trained them through the town hall, and I charged 30 gold for each, based on that price, I thought it maybe should be around 18. But with the current price that these are versus, like, let's say the knight that has a power rate of 6.2, I don't know, I'm just thinking that maybe it should be around 12. So I'm just putting it at 12, and you can see it here, right? I only have one siege unit on this map in particular, and I'm just looking at the statistics live as the clock ticks, because that's my only army. It's just the one siege unit that I have right here. For those who script in this language, I have 2 new scripting functions here, creating just the siege units. If you want to create siege units with give siege group, no new scripting functions are needed. a.givegroup or a.givegroup.ex is enough. Just using the default, and now it's going to be 28 and 29. 28 for the catapult and 29 for the ballista. Or UT catapult and UT ballista for the EX version. This is a map by Don't Talk, City of the Scorching Sun, and they have siege workshops in here. That's why I kind of wanted to show this. This is player 8. As we can see right now, there's no orders done, but there's going to be 2 of each. As you can see here now, it appeared. This carpenter here for player 9 already got enough resources, and he's already making a catapult, but now you can see here that the ballista is it's like it's blocked, but this one it's not. Anyway, I'll fast forward some. So this is player 9. As I can click on these, you can see it's player 9's catapults. But player 8, he didn't have enough resources yet to even make one. This is classical AI. They are kind of slow, and the way I put this in, it's not going to really make it a priority to build it. It's going to prioritize with iron troops first, and then it's going to make them whenever it can. And the way I have it set, the reason why it's 2 is I have a limit that each AI player can only make 1 siege workshop. And each AI player can only make 2 of each tops. If there are any pre-existing ones, if there's like 1, it's only going to make 1. If there's 2, it's not going to make any. The total number of each siege unit type that the player has must be no more than 2. So that's the gist of it, but let me show you why player 9 was not able to make ballista. Well, it's simple. You go to the map editor. If you know the map editor, I go to the people here and I click the person. I have it X'd out. This is working just the way that it normally does for those who know the map ed. Let's say that I play a map like Eruption and the AI is advanced AI. They're going to have the same restriction. I'm going to fast forward this though to like 53 minutes because I put a constraint that they cannot build their siege workshop until at least 53 minutes. It's not that it's going to build it at 53 minutes, but no earlier than 53 minutes. There's a spot for it here. And there it is, the door's on the left side, so that is definitely the siege workshop for this player. He has already set 2, so the advanced AI works the same way. He only is going to train 2, only going to build 1 siege workshop. If I click here, there's only 1. What you saw at the beginning of the video was the advanced AI fighting with them, so I don't really need to show that they can use them. I just wanted to show that they build this roughly around the time that I said, which is 53 minutes. I don't have such a time constraint set for the classical AI because they're not going to build it anyway until they're ready. Sometimes past an hour and 4 minutes, maybe longer when the advanced AI is going to do it in 56 minutes or something. So it just depends on how healthy they are. But the point of this was I wanted to not hurt their economy. I wanted to limit the number of siege units that they could have for their protection. And one final thing to note is that for the win conditions, because the town hall, schoolhouse, the barracks, they're all buildings that produce units, not weapons. happens that if we look at the win conditions here, now all of a sudden it's going to say Siege Workshop 2. I can easily take this out. It's just removing one word from a list, but probably should be there to be consistent with how they've been doing things. The first step to be able to play this, you have to go and get this. If you don't have the original game, either this or the Steam version, you need to go and buy it and install it on your computer and run it at least once. For the Steam version, you're going to have to literally run the Steam application. Like I have the Steam version here. If you were to run it from here, even though it's in the Steam apps, it's not going to count. You're going to have to run it through Steam at least one time. And then once you do, then I'll provide you a download link to the version of the game where you're going to download and install this after you've done that prerequisite. The remake should install here. I have other KaM Remake versions. It doesn't matter for you. You don't have to keep previous remake versions if you don't want to, but if you don't keep them, then you're not going to be able to play replays from older games. That's how it's always worked with remake updates. But anyway, unlike last time that we could just put the exe inside of here and run it with this current installation, we're going to have to actually install a new copy of the game from the installer itself for it to work. Otherwise, it's going to keep prompting you to run as administrator, and you're going to have problems with permissions and all. At least I did. I have a folder with my previous remake versions as well as the current in here, so I'm going to go ahead and install it again and just save it named something different than this. Here we go. Here's my chance to name it something different. Alright, now with it installed, I'm going to just take these two and drag them in, and you can let it replace, because this is a new folder for this mod. And I just got something from Windows Defender. You can say actions allowed because it wants to access the settings folder for KaM Remake. I have Windows 10 by the way, that helps it all. When you run it, it's going to create a saves SU folder, and if you have multiplayer saves, it's also going to create a multiplayer SU folder. But anyway, not that it matters, but if you go to the credits, you see me there, yay! But you can go to KaM Discord, and if you have any questions like with multiplayer, I haven't got any feedback from the previous video. If anyone got it to work with multiplayer, I only got one person that they said that they couldn't get something set up. And I told them something and I never heard back from them. So maybe it was a solution, maybe it wasn't, but anyway. Regarding the sound effects, I'm only going to provide the Catapult Shoot, because that was a KaM Remake sound effect. The rest of them are from Age of Empires 2, and I don't want to risk getting in trouble from copyright. But I'll do the next best thing for you. I'll provide a link to this video in the description, and as you can see, it's a pretty long video, one sound effect after another, and this was uploaded 10 years ago, so I think it's very low risk if you want just to have it and you want to make videos. I think it's very low risk, but for me as a distributor, that's another thing entirely. But anyway, I have it bookmarked where I got these sounds from, so you're going to have to download this video, use a video editor to cut out the segments of where the sounds are, make them into a sound file, convert them to a .wav, and then rename them to what you see here verbatim, and then put them in this folder, everything exactly as you see here, then you'll be able to hear the sounds. Here are the bookmarks. So for example, Siege Unit Death at 129. There it is. That was the death. They have the trebuchet sounds too if you want to use that instead, or if you want to use something from another game or don't have any at all, whatever. For those who want to just download the mod, thank you for watching and have a nice day. But for those who want to see how I added this code into the game, then your journey has just begun. Okay, so for the coders who are viewing this and they didn't see any previous videos of mine, I actually have two videos before this one that you definitely need to see. If you're not new to Pascal and Delphi and all that, this video here was just me showing how to compile KaM Remake and a few examples of making very minor modifications to the game. But this one you will need to. Maybe you can follow along because in this one I'm going to just start from scratch and retrieve code that I wrote in there. But I explained it over there. That's the thing. I explained it. So it's up to you. There's other things in there that maybe you can learn from if you're new to modding this game. And I can say developing this game at this point. If you're unsure, I promise you it is worth your time. I did not repeat myself a lot. It's long for a reason because it's a lot of content. But anyway, with that out of the way, I want to bring up the disclaimer which I gave at the beginning of that coding section, and I'm just going to say it again here. Not everything I'm going to tell you may be exactly 100% correct, but it's correct enough that it makes the game work and work as intended. No change that I'm going to show you is something that I don't know what it does or what it implies or what I imply it does or should do. Alright, I'm going to start with a clean copy of r15379 source code. Last time I went through a lot of things and added a lot of code. I'm not going to use all of it, but I'm going to reuse most of it, and therefore what I'm going to reuse from that video I'm not going to explain because this video is going to be long enough as it is for the new content. But I may occasionally say something to make things clear. I'm going to break up the source code into 4 different parts, at least for this video, but I'll be providing this in the video description for you to follow along. I'm going to do things differently this time to make it more efficient. These are Pascal files, obviously. I'm going to have them like that so that when I open them up with Notepad++, they're color-coded like this. First of all, throughout me recording this video, and even after I thought I was finished, I added several of these constants that you may not see as I show this again in the future. So I apologize for that, but this is the final one. But I put this here to make it easy on the developers if they want to actually add this to the game, or for those who want to make their own mod to easily be able to change the specs of the siege units to some degree. The one that will probably have the most drastic effect would be the delay in which it's firing. For those who didn't see the previous video, when a ranged unit fires at units and when it fires at buildings is 2 separate things, so that's why I have one for both. But anyway, more on this when I actually get to the code that contains these constants. From this video here, I talked about this. This is in the instructions that Ray provided, that for us that we don't have this file, we have to disable in order to compile. So that should already be taken care of if you've watched that video or read those instructions. Okay, so now it begins, and in the source code, if I didn't show it in the previous video, I'm just going to have the code before and code after and go through these just like that, and you can follow along. We're looking at 01 source code siege units. This means to add in new units into the game, really. That's what this is all about. This process I'm going to show you we can use to add in new units into the game beyond the catapult and the ballista. Things that didn't have any specs at all, that were not from the original units.dat file. I'll just say one more thing before I get started, but I will, a few times at least, mention some extra stuff that's not required to put in the catapult and the ballista, but to add in entirely new units. This process, therefore, that I'm going to show you is going to allow you to learn how to add in new units into the game in general, as well as the siege weapons. If you didn't see that silent video where I copied code and pasted, I'm just going to highlight this and I'm going to be copying it. That's what I'm going to be doing every time. And I'm going to be Control-Shift-F. Make sure that you search all files in project group, not any of the other scopes, so that the search results will come up. And I don't have case sensitive on. Every one of these that I search for, you'll see there's only one occurrence, or maybe once in a while there might be 2. But that's when I know at least that I copied a line that was a good line to use to find my way around all this source code where I want to edit. Okay, we'll be coming back to KaM defaults quite a bit because I'll be putting stuff in here for the Siege Workshop too. But right now I'm just going to X out of KaM Remake. It's very tempting to put the catapult and the ballista here. I mean, the developers have this here and they're basically placeholders, right? So obviously all I have to do is just uncomment it to add them in. And I did this before when I had trouble adding in the siege weapons that I said that it's not meant for people to add in new units into this game. That was part of it. Part of it was just looking at what happened when I added this in. It did not allow me to add them in. And I'll get to that in a little bit and show you how I found a way around it. It's just a little bit down, Warrior Max. Yeah, this is very important. Warrior Max is going to be, it was originally this, but now we added these, so now it's going to be Ballista. And I guess I should have added that in, but it doesn't matter, I guess. I'll get it this time. I just want to have my username so that I can search for my username every change that I made or get in the vicinity of the code where I changed something. Yeah, Humans Max is required too. Just wherever Vagabond is, just put Ballista basically. This is the set I added for siege units in the last video. I put it here instead of at the end just because similar things are there, so I wanted to put in the same group. I don't do something like that all the time. I added one new line of code. This is important because there's going to be lots of looping through sets in the source code in different places, and that was one of the things that I was like, there's so many lines of code you have to edit. But when we add in the siege units here inside of the warrior bounds, and we set the last unit we add in as the upper bound in the set that we loop through, then it makes things a lot easier, and you can, as long as you set this to be the new upper bound for every single set that they loop through unit types in all the source code. I know that's a mouthful, but basically that's what it is. Then all the different components that loop through the unit types are going to be able to loop through the existing units that were there before as well as the new ones. So that wasn't the issue, and I'll get to the issue soon, sooner than later. But now we have to get to, I mean, if I try to compile this, maybe it would help, right? Just to see where it would bring us. But it brings us here, and that's the next thing. So, I tried to put these lines of code in order in which you have to put them in once you add in the catapult and the ballista. Yeah, all this is easy. You can just use the debugger to find these, and it's okay. Maybe I'll just search for 5.3. Okay. And I can just let the debugger bring us there and open up res units for us. And here, these were placeholders, so we don't add anything in. It's just UT none. You replace UT none with these. You don't have to change the dimensions of the array. It's here. Okay, so for here, we're going to add these in, obviously. So I'll go ahead and copy that. I don't know how far down it is, but it's somewhere around here. Okay, it's right here. But I'm only going to have these three actions, not UA spec, because I checked in the paint projectiles procedure and the pool, and it didn't really do anything with UA spec. So there's no UA spec folder, quote unquote. I said folder in the previous video, but it's not folder, but it's an array that the game will pull from the units.dat file. But UA spec does not exist for the catapult and the ballista. Therefore, we'll only need these three actions for which we put custom sprites in, and I'll talk about that later, that we're going to actually use some of the sprites that it pulls from the unit.dat file instead of the custom arrays that I made, but we're going to still use most of the arrays that I made, and I'll explain why later. But in short, these unit actions, UA, only these three for the siege units. And I'm just going to control F it because I'm in the same module. Maybe you can see from the source code that I'm going to have an equals line that separates modules or Pascal files. So I can just control F it when I know I'm in a module to find the next thing. Okay, here all this is basic. Nothing like this was a big deal, obviously. You just use the debugger and it's going to pull you right to the line. And they had placeholders for everything and even filled it in. It just commented out. Next is this. We just need to add in 2 zeros. Alright, now we're in a new module. But I can just see, or really show you that the debugger is going to bring us there. And this one was a little bit confusing, but you just have to think, okay, what order are they in? And just keep looking to that as a reference when you're making a decision where to add in placeholders or even some new information for the catapult and the ballista. They're after the vagabond, so we put them here. As I say here, we're going to have custom sound files. Unlike last time, I'm going to actually add some sound files like for actions when we order them to do something. They're going to make some noises now. And of course, which I showed at the beginning of the video too. But honestly, I'm recording this before I record the beginning of the video. Next, right below it. This was probably the most confusing of this kind of stuff. I had to, again, think, what these are, but this gave it away. Warrior min to warrior max. This is the same, so we have to add them to the end. Just add an empty string, just like all these were. Now this is not going to show up unless you use the scripting language. Search for this with Control-Shift-F because the debugger is not going to pull it up unless you try to run a script. then it's going to pull it up, but otherwise it won't. This is the only place, which is nice, and you don't have to add in the Siege Workshop. It's already in the scripting language. And as I may say later, it was supported to a good degree. Okay, now we're at this step, and it should compile now. There should be no errors from the compiler, but as soon as you open the game, or I should say the game window pops up, this is the error that stopped me from adding the units to the game to begin with, that I swapped out the rogue for the catapult and the warrior for the ballista. If we just click show raw data and come here and then double click on this, it's going to bring us here. It's a very useful module, but it's kind of like a back-end thing and you don't know what's going on. It's like, what? And it stumped me, and I just didn't want to mess with it. But I had to mess with it eventually to add them in and not take away the rogue and the warrior to bring them back into the game. But basically, if I were to grab my write to file procedure, which basically is like a.log if you know the scripting language, just going to show you how I figured this out. In here, I'm going to write to file S and also separately a title and see what the heck this is. S is string, so I don't need to convert this to string. I can automatically do that, and I have a text file named this on my desktop. So if you want to use this procedure, I provided the source code, and I say here that if you want to use it in certain modules, you might have to use system utils if it's not used by that module or one of the modules that it uses. This is empty, and I'm saving it to make sure that it's empty, and I'm going to start the game again and see what it prints in there. Something to do with unit actions. Okay, press enter once and save it, and now I'm going to print a title instead and see what that is, because it's comparing two things and they're not the same, and that's why it's causing it to, there's an assert there, right? It's going to terminate it if the condition's not correct, and it's saying the same thing, but this was a keyword. I got these keywords just by printing that. And then as you can see in the source code yourself, I'm going to just remove this now because I don't want this to be a part of the code. This was just to do that. I can just X out of this and not save it. That takes care of that. But back to the source code here. So this is not something you change. This is just a note that this is what comes up. And in order to fix it, you have to go to this module. You see these size ofs here. These all have a fixed size. They are different sections or blocks of code from the unit.dat file that is allotted for each of these. So unit action was the first among them, and that's eventually how I found this. But what I did was I used the same log procedure that I showed you before, and I just logged each of these, and it gave me a number for how big they were. And this is how big they are. So all I need to do is I'm just going to search for this with Control-Shift-F, and I'm going to replace this entire procedure with this one down here instead. So these are the numbers hard-coded in. Because what's happening here is we added in new units, and it's looping through units in res units. So let me go to res units at the bottom here. There was a set number of unit.dat count. It was 41, as you can see here. I didn't change that. Before, the catapult and the ballista, which is UT catapult and UT ballista that we all of a sudden added into the game, is now going to appear as something other than UT none, and therefore it's going to run through here and all that. So I believe this is what is interfering with this running like it did before we added these in. That's what I'm thinking it is. And because of that, I just wanted to, before I added this in, I just opened up a fresh copy of the source code and logged each of these size ofs to here and got the actual numbers, as if I didn't add these in already, that they were not added in, so that when I add them in, it's not going to have any effect on this, because I'm going to change this to this, and that's the secret. It compiled last time, but when we tried to have the window open, it wouldn't open. It would give us an error, but now you can see it's gone. And it's not over if the game window opens. You have to wait like maybe 10 seconds sometimes, or you want to start a map. Like if I go and start a map here, I don't have any maps in here. I actually don't have any maps or campaigns, because when I make a new copy of the projects, it's a lot of extra space. I'm just copying maps over and over and over again. But I have some test maps from one of my previous copies that I'm going to paste in here. And I'm going to go ahead and delete the DCU just because I'm kind of slow sometimes, but I figure out that the DCU is to speed things up. You don't have to wait the full length every time for it to compile. But anyway, if I open up any map that has the advanced AI, for example, like, let's say like this one here, Siege Workshop. Yeah, in no time I get this. Rain check error, I click this and I click that and I double click on this. It brings us here. What is this? Okay, we can see the hints. This is new AI, that's advanced AI. So there's two different AIs for this game if you didn't know. There's classical and there's advanced. So new AI is the advanced. This has to do with that. Go up a little bit, we can see up here there's a boundary for unit types and specifically warrior types. This is just one thing that I had to take care of, but I'm going to do something similar as a result of this. I said maybe I should check the bounds for the unit types for other places in the source code to see what adding a new unit did to the game. But that's not difficult at all. The difficult part was to figure out this, to find where it was located in some random module, okay? And then do this so that what you do does not interfere with the .dat file, as though you didn't add in the placeholder units into the game. But anyway, that's what I say here, part 3. This is what I was talking about. I'm going to copy this code here to replace with warrior price. I'm just making 6. I don't know if that's going to really hurt anything with the advanced AI, but okay, so here, oh, all this, I guess. No, not that. Parentheses, I didn't copy that. There's some more boundaries, as I just mentioned, in the source code, so we're going to take care of that. It's like, what? You know, 0 through 13, what? Because they have warrior max. You know, it's like, why don't they have something for the warriors in every part of the source code? I don't know. But that's why I added in, this is not something that was there before, high warriors. If I go to KaM defaults, this is what I added in just a little bit down from here. It's going to be these -1. That's the high, obviously, because this is the length. That's how we define length of an array, right? So the high is just 1 less than that. I'm going to search for this. Just one occurrence, that's what we want. And copy all of this. So notice this. That means that if we add in more warriors in the future, we don't have to change this again. This is how it should be. And you, of course, add these 2 in there. We're going to add some more stuff here, at least one more thing later. Further down just a little bit, we have this to take care of. The same kind of thing. I'm going to add in high warriors here instead of 13, and high warriors here too instead of 13. And I'm going to add in 680 and 681. I'll explain that after I just copy this. Just give me a moment. Okay. Because we added high warriors, so there's a new high. It's going to be +2. We have to add in 2 new IDs. That's why I'm adding them in now. If I go to my project folder and I go to export, I have these here because it's a lot of files and I don't want to keep copy and paste them. So I have an export folder that's not in any one of the projects. It's just outside of them. And I go to this. And I see these. I scroll down to the very bottom. The last number is 679. These are new sprites. These are the ones that I made in the previous video. I'm going to go to one of my previous projects and I have this. I'm going to copy this, which is the files that you have to use to install the game, right? You have to put this in the main KaM Remake folder to install the game. So I'm going to go ahead and grab those. Go here and paste it in. This is going to replace the modding graphics folder. So Ray, if you're watching this, of course you're going to be doing some of the things I'm going to be showing next a little differently, but this is how I'm doing it for this mod. I'm going to therefore render the moddings graphic folder useless. It's not going to be read by the game at all. But in here I have it 680 and 681. So these are the files that I made for the icons in the previous video and the ballista. No need to show that again. I spent enough time on it in that video, and I'm going to temporarily move this. I have this as a demonstration, so I will not have that in the units folder, but I'm going to have this a demonstration. I'll show you later. I'm putting it in this folder for right now. But in short, that's what they are. I want to go ahead and add this in KaM defaults because I want to add in this here. It's going to be referenced in multiple parts of the source code, partially for the sound files as I showed in the previous video, but also for the sprites. I'm going to just go to the beginning of KaM defaults and put these in there. These are some constants, just some settings that we can change later, and I'll talk about this later, of course. All the way up to the top here. Let me just search for this. We're going to replace the modding graphics folder and the sound effects folder, everything with this name that we have a constant for now. And we can rename it to whatever we want in KaM defaults. That's what's great about that, of course, right? Two things to replace here. Just the name of the folder and the path to where the sounds.dat file, the new sounds.dat file that I modified with hex editing into there instead of where the default sounds.dat file is. And then we're going to, of course, do this. Go find the name of the modding graphics folder itself, which is here. I don't search for comments because they may change. It's just a habit, so I make sure that I'm not depending on a comment to be there. I'm going to go ahead and compile this. And let's see what happens. Let's go to the map editor. I have every unit in here, just like it is in this menu here, and then the catapult and the ballista are going to be there after we add them in. And I'm going to quick play this because I want to show you that. Click on this, there's no sound.
Sire?
But you hear ones for these, but not for him.
I'm listening.
Right? So some of them are silent. What's going on there? That these are silent. These are silent, but they're silent because we didn't add the sounds yet. But why are these silent?
Ready.
Well, it's as the comment I say here says, only a subset of the sounds would work before I made it UT Vagabond. Warrior Max is changed. Now Warrior Max, we changed it to the Ballista, but for some reason or another, it's got to be UT Vagabond. It's got to be exactly the same it was before in order for all the sounds to work as they did before. Alright, so here. And you only have to delete the DCU folder when you make a modification to a constant up here or to a procedure up here, something like that. If you modify something within the implementation section of a module or file, then you probably don't have to delete it. But here, most definitely I do. I'm going to compile it and run it to test it to see that those sounds came back. That's what I'm doing.
Your command? At your command. Yes.
Now they're all back. Okay, we have a rain check error when I clicked on the siege units. Let's see, it says that. We can take a look. Yeah, so if you trace this and follow it, this will be it here. This is where we're going to take care of that. I made so many changes to this procedure that I'm just going to, as I show in the source code, I'm just going to replace the entire thing. So these are the new sound effects for when you select and when the siege units die. That I used sounds from Age of Empires, their siege units instead. And I have a little spot here that if you want to add something for select for new siege units in the future, if you want to add in more siege units, then it's not that it really has to be here. You can see it if you know what you're doing, but it doesn't hurt to have it there, I guess. When they fire and all, that's something else altogether, but when they are selected and when you order them to move, it should be okay. Yeah, and you can see that we see them already and we didn't add in any sprites. Okay, this is because I have an enemy unit in here that's a catapult or a ballista that it's going after one of my units. That's why it's saying unknown shooter. This is something that we came across in the previous video. No need for me to explain it. I just need to add in that code in the unit warrior module. This is eventually going to cause a similar type of error and it deals with the sound, so I'm going to just tackle it now before we move on. Alright, here, just go down, it's right here. Just have it checked that the unit type is not a siege unit. I want to, as you can see here, let's take a look at the map editor, the unit icons in there. This turned out to be unique. One occurrence. We're most definitely going to have to delete the DCU folder. and start again when I replace this, but I'm gonna go ahead and do a few more things while I'm here in the same module because there's a equal dividing sign here, so just Control F is enough. I added in a new variable called offset here because when you want to change one thing in the menu, you're gonna have to change everything if you don't kind of link them together with some type of variable that when you change the variable to move everything down, everything moves down at the same time. I know it's not like that entirely, but in this case it's not moving down, it's moving to the right. I'm going to replace it with that from where it says line 258 to 310, 258 to 310. But basically every line that I changed is a line that you see my username, Cmola, and that's the offset that I added in there. Okay, let's go ahead and take a look. Going to the map editor. Oh, I didn't. And you have to close this, whatever the module is. And I didn't make any changes. Wow. Wow. Okay, let's try it again. Useful, but at the same time a pain. It's like maybe you can turn this off and you won't have that problem. You just have to wait for it to compile fully every time, even if you make a tiny little change. But okay, map editor. Go here and there, and now we have them in. We click them and they're there. That's great, but I had to move these over. That's the whole idea. I could have moved them down a whole nother row and had a blank spot, but they weren't centered before, so I thought it's better that I move them over to the right so that they're kind of centered in this entire panel overall. And these numbers here, they're not centered. I'm not going to center them because they just weren't centered. But that was the idea. I wanted to move these over and add these in. The only change I made up here again was to add an offset variable. I have assigned an 18 to it. That seemed to be the magical number. Offset these accordingly. This is just user interface type of code. You can study this to see why it works, and that if you were to compare the distance between this and this, it's the same. Like you just take a screenshot of this and look at it in Microsoft Paint or something, count the number of pixels to see that the distance is the same. So I paid attention to that, and that's all I'm saying. This right here was on the same row as this one, so it didn't really matter. That was already done. But when I wanted to add in this one, then I had to pay attention to that. Next, as it says here, we want to block units. While we're in the map editor, we go to the two people and then we click on the person. Here, when you left click on this, we block, right? We need to create a new row and says in Siege Workshop, but there are a total of 28 different languages supported in the KaM Remake so far. And putting an in front of the town hall for every single one of them, you'd have to get a translation for each of them, right? So I just used the @ symbol instead of in. And I have town hall, whatever the translation of the word town hall is. That's how I handled it for right now as a start. Alright, before we do that though, some of this code in this module that we're going to be editing depends on town hall order, barracks order, schoolhouse order, or maybe it's just called unit order for the schoolhouse. But anyway, so we need to go ahead and search for that. I just wanted to keep it nice and clean, like it was in the source code already, and add in something called Siege Workshop Order, because that's what Ray or whoever is going to do this. If they're going to add this in, this is what they would do, and this video may be watched by Ray. This might help him out, speed things up, and get the Siege units into the official vanilla remake version. So I wanted to take care of everything involved with adding the Siege units and the Siege Workshop in that I could think of to make that process as easy for him as possible, or for whoever wants to pick up with doing this. I can hard code this in as 0 to 1. Alright, now we're going to go to the actual module where this is. Alright, so I added in some new procedures because they have special procedures for town hall, for the barracks, and for the school. Control F, that. I put these all right here, but there's a specific part of the module for each of these different types of procedures. Procedures for click, then they have some down for refresh and so forth, but I just put everything in one spot so it's fewer things for me to copy and paste in. But you would just take this and move this down if someone is going to actually add this to the official KaM Remake release source code permanently. That's how I'm doing it right now. That's why I'm doing it. But here, 307, this is the top. This is a new row that I had to add in for in Siege Workshop. I went and took a screenshot of this, the distance between the top of the words here and the bottom of these icons in order to figure this out. I'm going to go ahead and close the game now. A little bit more code to add in though. this one. Okay, that's the end of that. Let's go ahead and compile this and see what happens before I get to the next step. Oh, I didn't delete the DCU folder, so be careful here. Just X out of whatever module it is. Unless it was a module you're working on, you don't want to save it when you X out. Click there, and all of a sudden we see them. We click and now we have an X, and you can see the hints. It says catapult and ballista accordingly, but there is no icon, but everything else should work. I don't have the Siege Workshop supported yet. I mean, it's in here, look at this, it's in the game, but we don't even have that in yet. But anyway, yeah, they're not supported yet. I cannot therefore test this to see anything about it. But let's add in the icons now. We already added them in an interface game, didn't we? We added in 680 and 681, but that seems to only be for, therefore, when we want to go ahead and add a unit for a player, that it's here, but it's not over there. It's two separate things. And this thing that I'm going to show you now is in res units that we didn't edit last time because we didn't need to, but now we have to edit it. So some things that we didn't edit before for the units we're going to have to edit now, and some things that we edited before we're not going to have to edit now. So this is what I'm talking about. And there you go. They are fully functional, but the Siege Workshop is not going to be responsive until we, first of all, add it in. Officially, it's not added in yet. And then after that, then we have to make it responsive to this. So we'll get to that when we get to the Siege Workshop. But just for now, these are dealing with the units, and therefore that's why I added them in. But it's also a partial Siege Workshop support. This next section is for those that are wanting to add in new sprites into the game, as it says here. Let's say that the game is closed. I come in here and I go to the modding graphics folder, which is not recognized anymore, by the way. It's not, because if it was, it would be throwing an error right now with these in it. Everything is now read from this folder. If I would add them in here and I would start the game, I'm just starting the game from the play button. I don't have to recompile it, right? Yeah, I just have to wait a few seconds and this is going to come up. You click this and you come here and it says this. So this is the beginning of a section where the remake developers may or may not be interested because they're not going to probably want to add in more units into the game. Maybe they would want to add in some more animals. That might be okay, but adding in new units itself is going to change the game too much and will stray away from the original game. But yeah, maybe an animal or something, or a creature that's in the sea to make the sea more decorative or whatever. But this section is for game modders specifically, so I'll try to keep it brief, but of course I'm going to have this bookmarked, so for those that want to just continue with the main code, just skip to the next section. But okay, let's say that we want to add in some new sprites to be read from the modding graphics folder, which I'm renaming this folder for right now, but you can rename it to whatever you want to, or keep the modding graphics folder, whatever. If we go to the export folder, we look at the units RXA. I removed all the mask files from here and the .txt files just so that I can see the main sprite files themselves, and the largest one is almost at 64,000, as you can see. I just wanted to be able to make this simple, that if someone wants to add a new sprite, that they don't potentially mess with this, because there's so many different folders that have sprites in them with different numbers. To just start with 100,000 even. You can have a range from 100,000 to 999,999. One shy of 1 million. That will make things simpler for people who want to add in their sprites. They can just start out fresh. Like 100,000 will be like 0, and they can just start from there. Keep everything that was in the game from before and just add in new stuff. And that's what this is all about. And therefore I have these in order in which they would occur for you to use the debugger to tackle them one by one. X'd out of the game, and it's here. All you have to do is change this from word. Word is not like the word, like a word. It's, for those who don't know this language very well, which I'm assuming that those who just want to mod it casually may not. It's just a type of number. It's a smaller number than integer. An integer can be much larger of a number. Both are whole numbers, but integer can be much larger than a word. So you can look up word in Pascal and see how large it can be. I think it's around 64,000, somewhere around there, and just change that to allow it to be a larger number for the index. That's what this is all about. They're IDs or indexes. They're the same thing. We just allow it to be a larger number. In this case, this one is one shy of 1 million as the upper bound. So if it supports this, it's surely going to support 100,000. That's why I chose to have this in here. It's just a catapult, and I'm going to show this in a moment after I add this in that it works. But that's all we have to do. Just for a few procedures, change that, and we have to do one other thing, as we'll see. With the modding graphics folder, why they would have it at word instead of integer, I don't know. If people are going to add in enough sprites to slow down starting up the game or whatever, it's their choice. But why restrict them to that? I don't know. And this is just the declarations for these three that we just changed it from word to integer. If we try to compile this, which if we do, we have to delete the DCU folder because we changed the declarations up here. You just have to wait, and once the game starts, see if it's going to give you an error or not. And it did, right? We can see where it's going to lead us, but it's right where I'm going to show you next. So this is the change you have to make. This is the original code, and this is the new code. But there you go. That's what this is all about. Yeah, that turns out that's all you have to do. Just make that change there. Just add an and into what was previously there, and we wait, and we wait, and we wait some more, and we're good. Even with this in here, right? That's what was causing the problem. The index was too high. But let's test this. So I have to X out. Let's test it. If I go to the render pool, and I have this just for me that I'm searching for to get here fast, but just to replace some unit. Let's say the rogue. The ID is assigned here, as you saw in the previous video. We know all about this procedure. No matter what its action is, let's just say that the rogue becomes this sideways catapult. So it's going to look stupid, but this is a quick test. When you add a new unit, entirely unit in theory, this is what's going to happen. Let me move these out of the way. There he is. His flag is all the way over here, and that's where you select him.
I'm listening.
Well, it's almost. Where is he?
Ready. Yes. What is it?
There he is. It's hard to select him because he's invisible. Because this is offset so much.
Boys.
And if you heard about in the previous video when I mentioned about adding in sprites, that you have to deal with offsets and all. So I'm not going to get into that again. What I said then still applies, especially, again, when you want to add in new sprites. But there it is. That is this, no? And just to check real quick, if I were to change this to a different player, there it is, right? Don't worry about the flag. The flag is not the issue. The catapult itself, the bands around the supports, they changed color because I have the mask here too, just to show that it reads them both just fine, even with a number this high. That concludes this brief section about adding in, and I'm going to remove this. I'll come back here in a little bit, but I'm going to still close this module because we didn't really add any official code in yet. But there's no harm in me keeping this in either, so I'll save it, and that is that. Alright, so now we're on to the next section. This is going to be brief. This is just doing a few things that I showed in the previous video. Change the remake version number, that's one of them. Make sure to say any file because you won't be able to find it otherwise. And the previous remake version that I had it with a 0 at the end, but I'm just going to add a 1 because this will be different, and if I make an update it'll be 2 and so forth. I don't think I'm going to make that many updates. Hopefully this is the last one. Done something fundamentally different now. I've added in Siege Workshop and actually added in the catapult and the ballista. Hopefully bug free, but I don't know. But I'm going to save this and just X out of it. It's just one change. There's no need for that to stay open. Next, I can search for this. I'm an additional programmer, not the main programmers, and I don't need to edit this again, so I'm going to close it. So that our game looks normal. Yeah, these I believe I showed at the very end of the video. These little changes here I'm showing you now. It's this down here that I did towards the beginning of the video. And one thing I'm going to change about this is I'm going to get rid of the TH because the town hall is no longer a part of this. It's just this. So it's just Siege Unit Mod. But same thing in every other way. And that's the end of this section. That was all there was to this. But compiling it, we see that little window pop up before the main window does. We can see the name now, and up here we see the version and everything. Debug is gone, and all of a sudden I get something from Windows Defender. That's probably going to happen for you too. Alright, moving on. We're now going to get into the same kind of stuff that we were working on the previous video. All the stuff I showed before was to efficiently add in new units into the game and also do a few things in the map editor that you have to do. Some GUI work that I didn't have to do before because the icons that I added in just replaced the rogue and the warrior icons that were there. But that's some extra work we had to do for the map editor. Regarding the units, we're going to have quite a bit of work to do for the Siege Workshop later on. But I want to just try to briefly go through this, but it's so many changes that it's going to take a little while, but I'm going to still go step by step to maybe have a few comments as I go. But for the most part, most of this code is from the previous video, so therefore I don't recommend you to skip over it. But if you just want to skip to the Siege Workshop, I understand, but there might be some things in here that you may need to know in order to understand when I get to that. And this is today's date. I may not release this today. Yeah, the release date's going to be later. I have to edit this video, and it probably takes several days. But anyway, first things first, go back to res units. Yeah, but that's it. I mean, all the extra things we had to do to convert the warrior into the ballista, we don't have to do. We added in new ranged units, and there you go. And as you can see, in the previous video, I added in a whole bunch of stuff for sprites and all. I'm going to add a little bit here, not quite as much as before, because as you can see, we already see the siege units. The game automatically pulled them from the units.dat file, like it does for all the other units. But there is a problem with it. The quality of the sprites are not as good, at least for the die and the firing, or the work it's called, as is the ones that I showed in the previous video. That, for one, it doesn't have this frame. It's missing this frame, and I used the still frame as the first frame of death. But besides that, the firing sequence, to make it look fully like the original game, the pause right here and all of that, it's just not mimicked by just relying on how the remake pulls in from the units.dat file alone. It's just not enough. As I'll show when we get to it, when it rolls or walks, it actually looks better than what I had. It looks smoother and stuff like that. So I'm going to keep that one, but we're going to replace the work and the die with the custom arrays that I added in the previous video. So none of that work and all the knowledge and all that is lost by any means. We're trying to make this look as good as possible, and therefore I'll admit that the walk looks better. The default sprites that the game pulls, the way it pulls them in, looks better than mine. Alright, why not take care of the hunger? That's next. So they're no longer hungry, and that the hunger bar actually shows the hit point bar for the siege unit. Same old, same old. Right here. And then an entirely different module. I think I just had an if statement in the source code, but I'm just going to copy the entire procedure over this to make it easy on us. And again for that one. Alright, so now we're going to get into this stuff, which is in the same module, so I can just control F all these. Before we wrecked everything to do with the rogue, we changed it. The difference now is we're going to actually add in new stuff and not touch anything that was here before. And I know I don't have to search for these individually, I can just scroll down, but I don't want to miss any of them. Alright, in the previous video I modified this to avoid exploit. Well, it actually turns out that I don't need to do that. I still have to do it, but not here. So this code right here that I added in the previous video is fine, I'm not going to touch this. I just replaced this entire procedure because I made so many changes to it, just to make things simple. But this one, as I say here, it is when you halt them, that it won't give them declared to immediately fire again. This is a previous project that I had before I made this video, so I can temporarily, just give me a moment. If I were just to have this, which is the default code, well basically it was this, but because I added a case up here to check if it's a catapult or ballista when it is arranged, then I made it like this. But if I were to temporarily remove this code here and compile it and load a map, see, immediately it gives him entitlement to fire again. But if I remove that and just add in what I wanted to add in basically. Okay, I halted him. Now it's going to be the full delay before he fires again. Well, if he will. You know, they confused him, but he was going to, as you saw at the last minute. Nothing at all new to say here with this one. Nothing new at all. This is the exact same as it was before. This is when they fire their projectile at what frame in the animation they do that. This one here, I made a change to the code from last time. It includes the constants that I have here in KaM defaults. The minimum the delay can be for attacking units or for attacking houses is 30 because that's the number of frames in the attacking animation. And I guess since I said minimum is 30, I don't need this anymore because this will ensure that it won't be a negative value just to avoid some unnecessary computations. The closest a unit can be that they're going to fire at them. I just made it the same as the other ranged units. And as I mentioned at the beginning of the video, I was wrong about the siege units having +1 range over regular. They don't. They have the same shooting range. And I just made it more compact like this. Those constants that you saw in the original code, they're not used anywhere else. They're only used here and they're all the same. It's therefore not necessary to have all that to confuse future editors of the code. And this should be indented. That looks like what the problem is. I need to indent that. Okay, now it makes more sense. This is very straightforward. That's all it is. Yeah, that went so much quicker than the previous video. Even though I replaced units in the previous video, I put in a projectile name for these, so there's absolutely nothing new about that. Here's something different, so I'm going to talk about this. This is for the sound effects. I have Catapult Shoot, the one that sounded like the static alien noise, and we didn't get to see it yet. I mean, I showed it in the beginning of the video, but I actually used the sound file itself. I used, in sounds here, Catapult Shoot. And I actually modified this. I lowered the pitch. I think I lowered it one. Even the ballista shoot, I had to lower it one because it was one pitch too high. I didn't pay attention to it in the last video. But when I was comparing it to the sounds of the ballistas in here, I could hear that this was a little bit lower. It was just one pitch lower. I modified the sounds.dat file using hex editing. I did in the same way to actually, what I'm trying to say is, even though this is a file by itself that was exported with the Pascal script that Ray provided to us, it was just one of the sound files in the attachment that was with that script. But anyway, that's how I got it. But and when I modified this, it's the same type of gibberish code, modified the same character to lower the pitch by 1 notch. But even though it's here, I still have it here because I'm going to indirectly use this to signal the game to call that external sound file. So it's not going to really mean anything in any sense of the word here, any sense of the context for which these sound effect files that we've seen from the previous video that they were here. But that's all I really have to say about this. Everything else is the same. And although I put it off to the very end, the actual strength of the siege units when they fire, we're going to handle it right now. At the beginning of this module, I'm going to have to, which I didn't want to do, okay? Ray and anyone watching this, I didn't want to do this. And this is the only time I did this, to use a new module. But I needed to, in order to balance the catapults, because they were so strong when there were multiple catapults, to make it weaker when there are multiple, but to keep the strength of a single one resemble the original game, I had to change my algorithm up a bit. But basically, when you have one catapult firing, it's just one catapult in the group. So if you have other ranged units that are not catapults, even a ballista doesn't matter, but it's one catapult, then it's going to have more strength than when you have multiple catapults. Because the logic, I guess, is when they throw rocks at the same target, the rocks might hit each other in the air and hinder each other from going to the target because they're hitting each other. That's the logic behind it. It kind of makes sense of this, that when you have one catapult, it's stronger than when you have multiple catapults. And we make them weaker, so they're not as strong, and that enemy units have a chance to come and kill some. But I had to include these in order to check the group information. So I told you the long version, but that's the short version of it. I need to be able to access group information, and I need to include both of these, or I should say use both of these at the beginning of this module. And so there you go. Alright, the big procedure. I added this in because I'm using the random number generator multiple times inside of here, just to make it short that I don't keep having this code over and over and over again. For those who didn't see the previous video, basically I got this code from the scripting language, the utils function for random range I or something like that. Pick a number from 1 to 100. And this is also the number from. This one right here was here by default. They have a string here, as you can see down here, with the procedure name. This procedure's name is this, and it's there. It looks like there's no comma with this one, but there's a comma with this one. But if I open up utils, it's random range I, and it has the comma. So this is basically what I reused up here. And besides that, I have the same variables that I did before, but now I also have these down here because I need to get the group information. I needed to get the number of catapults in the group. That has to do with the catapult potency. This has nothing to do with the ballistas, as we'll see soon. But just like last time, I have to replace this with that so that the catapult hitting building sound is not played when it hits a unit. It's only going to be played when it hits a house. Alright, this is the big one. I'm just going to paste over that tower rock line to make it simple. Even though last time I put these with else ifs instead of just ifs like this, I left all this code alone. That's the point of all this that I'm trying to make. Just to give the developers and everyone else a peace of mind that I didn't change anything. Now the projectile types are here. I just have a new projectile type for the ballista and one for the catapult. So I'll go through these because in the previous video, number 1, I didn't have friendly fire, and number 2, I didn't do anything to hinder a ballista bolt from successfully killing a unit when it reached it. But I did both here. Let me just comment on this, that 10% of the time, well, I observed from the original game, or I should say in this case it's the Steam version, when you would have a unit like the Rebel with no armor surrounding a building and attacking it, so it could be militia or anything, and I had 7 catapults and they would be firing at the building, then there would be about 1 casualty. You can see there it was 12, but I lost 1. And I just kind of weighed that in and experimented, a trial and error with every single percentage from 25% on down to 8%. And it seemed 8% was enough, but 10% was a little bit more consistent with that kind of result. And therefore that's why I chose 10% of the time for that. But when they attack buildings, should one use buildings as walls and such? I just wanted to take off 1 hit point for that, but I decided to make it 4 because that's how much damage the unit causes. Things need to make sense, and even with it taking off 4 hit points, it's still roughly the amount of damage that I think it should have, despite being this percentage of the time that it actually hits a friendly building. And again, I'm talking about the catapults. The catapults is the same thing right here. Therefore, I just made the ballista the same with both the units percentage and with this. And I tested the ballistas for the units, and as I showed at the beginning of the video, the turnout for the battles very much closely matched the Steam version, the amount of casualties that I had. But that's with friendly units only losing 1 hit point, instead of unit hit points max. Nothing else with the ballista changed except for ballista potency here is set to 80% of the time. If it's an enemy, then take off all his hit points. Kill him basically. Or it if it's another siege unit. Alright, now when we get down to the catapult, really nothing more to say here for the building. Same explanation as above. When we get down here though, this is where I need to count the number of catapults that are in the group with the catapult. This is part of the catapult potency. For example, I have a spreadsheet with this formula here. The potency is currently set at 25. If I were to set it at 45 where I have it set right now, and I were to copy this down, assuming that I have 94 catapults in the group. So it could be other ranged units, it could be ballistas too, anything. They're up to 94 catapults in the group. It goes to negative, so what I did was put a max here that it's going to be at least 40 as in 40% of the time. Then it's going to damage an enemy unit. And if it's going to damage an enemy unit, 50% of the time it's going to take off 2 hit points, otherwise it'll take off 1. Combining all this together produces the desired results. 1 catapult is going to take anywhere from 0 to 3 lives with each shot. 58, so it's just 2 there. Okay, there it is. That was 57 to 54. The units to harm in the previous video was 2 to 3. It depended on a random number generator, but I found that it needs to be at 2 no matter what, and it'll be okay. Everything looks to be balanced like the original game, and as I showed at the beginning of the video, it's more than fair, in addition to matching the original game. But one thing I want to mention is that it only will consider decreasing the units to harm or count off that it hurt a unit when it's an enemy unit. Otherwise, it's going to continue to search all the offsets until all the offsets or nearby units has been searched, and it'll quit. So that now when we have friendly fire take into account with the same percentage as what I talked about with the ballista, only 1 hit point, it's not going to hinder the rock from hurting a nearby unit that's an enemy. Just to note that I didn't make that mistake. And I originally had it take off half the hit points of the unit, and because hit points can be an odd number, I had it round down 1. So if a unit has 3 hit points, I would have it take off 1, because you can't take off a single number of hit points. It has to be an integral number of hit points. As you can see, if I delete this parentheses and put it back, it's going to say byte. not single. That would be ideal for the catapult because a catapult throws 4 bows worth of damage, but it only throws 3 rocks. So 4 divided by 3 is 1.3 repeating. But it doesn't work out that way, but this is a way around it, to use a probability, and it turns out to be 50% that, as I say here, 48% is sufficient for one catapult to resemble the original, and it's cut off, but the original game's damage, but less than that is not. 48% as in that one shot is going to kill anywhere from 0 to 3 units. If it's any less than that, then it's not going to be enough. It's only going to kill 2. And if you go significantly less than that, it will only kill 1 and so forth. But 50%, it's going to kill them often enough that it's going to resemble the original game. I know what I just said about this section is a mouthful, but a lot of changes, and that's why. I guess one final thing to note here is that you have to check if the catapult in question is existent and not dying, but then you have to also check every single unit in the group to see if that's also the case before you can successfully loop through them and all. So it's not perfect. It may not count exactly how many catapults are in the group, but as I was mentioning over here, if I were to say max 40 comma and then copy this formula down, then this is what we're looking at. And it's only going to matter, as you can see, when it gets to more than 26, then it's going to be 40. That's what the current potency set at 45. And to be absolutely clear, this is the percentage of the time that it's going to damage a unit, period. If it's not this percentage of the time, it's not going to damage it at all. And therefore, if I would increase this to, like, let's say 55, instead of it leveling out at 40% of the time at 27, it's going to level out at 40 at 33. Just to make some type of linear relationship that the more catapults there are in the group, the less often it's going to harm nearby units. Because I had to figure out a way to make a single catapult as potent as it was in the original game, but not make the mistake that I made last time and say, okay, since I made that powerful, it should be okay. When they get combined together, logically, their strength of each of them should stay the same, but when that happens, it becomes too imbalanced. But it still reflects a group's power in the original game, as I demonstrated. Nowhere in the patches that I played with the siege units of the original game did they mention adjusting the strength of the siege units. It's just not there. It didn't actually touch the units or anything else like that. Alright, so now we're going to make our way down to the sprites. So here I didn't change anything. This is identical to how it was before. There may be a better way to handle the catapult rocks. I thought about it some more after I made that video and edited that video and so forth, but nothing seemed to be a solution for me. But in order to use the ballista bolt sprites, I have to add in my custom array and everything that goes with it. So I'm going to go ahead and add that in here. Same stuff. And all of my custom arrays. Now let's get into some sound effects and the 3 rocks for the catapult. Again, did not change anything with the rogue like I did last time. I kept it the same this time. But this time, as you can see here with the comment, we're going to not do anything for the catapult and the ballista because we have to mark them, as I said in the previous video, because if not, then it's going to give them non-ranged unit hit sounds. Okay, so this is the big one for the 3 rocks and so forth. This includes the drawing sounds. I have to go, this is when they attack units, not when they attack buildings. The drawing sounds for that is over here. Attack house. Fewer things in here. Okay, it's right here. And so for this one, this has been changed a little bit since last time. 21 was here. What I figured out was it already had 3 seconds of delay because there are 30 frames or 30 ticks worth of the animation. So you just have to add that to whatever you add to the delay here. So I had 21, so it was 5.1 seconds total of a delay when they attack a building. Therefore, I just did this basic math that it will correspond with the constants that you have set here. A little bit further down, the rogue is still muted, as you saw in the previous code just a second ago. But now I'm also muting the catapult and ballista here, because if not, then it's going to say unknown shooter. But those sounds for attacking buildings are in procedure unit action stay make sound, as you can see in the comment. And the last thing for this part, or this procedure I should say, I don't know why I have the comments as part of it, but whatever. And I can just, it's a lot of changes. Delete the DCU folder first of all. And let's see what happens. I think the siege units at this point should be fully functional. Their sprites are still not finished. We have to use the arrays of sprites that I put in the pool, but let's see if they fire at buildings and we hear a sound. See, there you go. That's the Catapult Shoot. That's the next step. That's what I wanted to show. So they're fully functional. They cause damage and everything. But we want to fix that sound, and I had to do something I didn't want to do in order to use the Catapult Shoot sound here while putting this here to signal the game to use it. I removed the constant from here so that this is able to be modified, and I have to do the same thing here basically. That's all I did, I removed it. Go down to the same procedure or function, I should say. That's what we do. We catch it right here and we play it from the sound folder and we exit. If it doesn't exist though, then we continue, but we're going to mark this as no sound effect because we don't want to hear that if they don't have a WAV file in here named Catapult Shoot. Better to hear nothing than that. And again, I had to remove const in front of a file here in order to do that. But that's just one of the unhappy changes I had to make besides what I showed just a little while ago for using 2 additional modules inside of Projectiles that weren't there originally. I did not do that anywhere else for anything, but that's the only way I could think of to be able to get some information about the catapults who are firing to kind of balance it out. When there are multiple catapults, make them less powerful than if it was one, so that the one behaves like it does in the original game and the multiple don't behave like an absolute nightmare. Alright, so now I'm going to get into the res units part where we're going to look at stuff with the sprites and also the specs. I'm going to add in my write to file procedure above, but basically I'm just adding in another variable, and it's going to be the loop variable. And I lost that comment there. Maybe I should have kept it, but anyway, that's that loop variable. But I have this in here because I'm going to add in a whole bunch of commented lines so that we can observe what the specs are for the siege units, because it actually pulls it from the unit.dat file. So all of this in here, pasted over the vagabond. So what I'm going to do is, I have the results here, but I just want to show you that when you start the game, it's going to, as I showed in the previous video, it's going to execute this constructor one time and do stuff. Let's just see what it puts in here. I have in the first column all of the information with the bowman, and then I put the catapult on the right hand side. Okay, there it is. So I diagrammed it inside of here itself. I'm going to comment this out, and so you can see here that 180. That's the attack. Wow, they have an attack of 180. That's nice. Attack horse 55 and so forth. So I got the defense right, and I got the speed approximately right. It's exactly 50%, not 0.52 times. Sight though is the same sight. So in the previous video I had the sight as +1. The one that really sticks out is the one that's not 0, and it's times 10, which could be building attack, I don't know. But we already know from the previous video how many hit points they take off or should take off with a successful hit. So we don't need to worry about that. That's not even used by the source code. Even if it is to attack building, they have their own code for that. That's why I have this in here, but down here I only have, this is the only change that I'm adding in, and that is to reset the die count to not 30, that's the default, but to make it 22, because if not, then because the game has pulled in sprites now for the catapult, it's going to actually mess it up. So I need to actually truncate it to 22 so that it's only the custom sprites that I have and only them. It's going to animate dying twice, and the second one will be much briefer obviously if I don't do this. So that's just one note. 2 lines of code, 1 for each siege unit. So now it's time to go to the pool, take care of the sprites themselves, to be able to read them in, process those arrays that are there, use the arrays that are there. We know this procedure very well from the previous video. I made some modifications to it because the animation wasn't in sync, and I attempted to use another procedure inside of the Unit Warrior module to do it, but it just didn't work. And so therefore, this is the new code. The main change is I took out walk ID because I'm using the default walk because it looks smoother, as I said already at the beginning of the video. But in addition, I'm not going to have the mod, like for the step ID mod 21 here. I don't have that for the step ID for when they're attacking or working, because it would allow the animation to get off whack. It wouldn't happen often, but when it would happen, you would notice it. For example, if I were to temporarily, just for the catapult, because I'll show that, I'll remove this code and I would say here step ID mod R15379 like I had it before, and I actually just redid this in a previous project of mine so that we can see it. We just observe a catapult throwing for a long time. As you can see here, like it's 1 minute and 19 seconds. The arm shouldn't be there. And look, all of a sudden it starts to look a little off when the rocks come out. Look how bad it gets, right? It gets pretty bad, and me trying to fix this in other places maybe helped a little bit, but it just didn't fix the problem. It would just prolong it or offset it from happening, basically. Just terrible. But in the same previous project, I'm just going to press Ctrl Z to undo these changes I just made to it. Let's go ahead and play this. Okay, we're at roughly the same amount of time as when it went bad last time. It's staying where it's supposed to, both the animation of the arm and the rocks. I fast forwarded some to hopefully, and there's still some alive, but we can see it even at this point so much further into the game. I'll not fast forward so you can see the full animation, but the rocks come out at the right time and the arm is straight up when it's finished firing, even at this point. So I'll uncomment this now in this project that I am showing you. But other than that, note that we have to have an else here to be able to handle the walk and everything else that's associated with the catapult that comes through here. And of course the same with the ballista. These else's are the same exact code that is here. One last change that I made in the render pool for siege units is to fix their flags. As you saw in the beginning of the video when I did a comparison of my Siege Workshop with the original games, and afterwards I showed a flag. Well, we're going to fix this. We have to make offsets for this. It's just like what I talked about in the previous video, but we actually need to make offsets. So as you can see, it looks pretty good. It may not be exact and it's kind of hard to tell because the flags move. And this was one I made for the ballista. Okay, so I added two optional parameters, the X and Y offsets. This was for the procedure definition, but this is the procedure that calls that one, and this is the one that creates the flags. So because this is the one that calls that, I need to have these as local variables for here, the X and Y offsets. Then I come down here, and then there you go. So nothing really important except that for those who maybe don't know about optional parameters, this was the default line of code that was here as you saw, but there actually was an existing optional parameter that wasn't even passed with this procedural call right here. Therefore, in order to use my optional parameters that I just added, I had to pass the default for that one and then my offsets. It's very sensitive. As I mentioned in the previous video, you have to go by decimals. Like 0.01 is like 1, moving it to the left, or yeah, in this case it's to the left because it's negative, but just UT catapult, ballista, and then else for everything else. And this is a good place to put it and not inside of here itself, because every single sprite is going to be passed through here. But this procedure obviously is add unit flag, and therefore it's going to be a lot less taxing to check the unit type and then to check the direction to get the offsets. Now when we get to the subroutine itself, this is where I have to add in the optional parameters again, because it was just a definition of this at the beginning of the code module as always. But then this is where the X and Y offsets kick in. So by default there's 0, so no change for any other sprite that has to be rendered. And that concludes this. But other than that, I was going to originally use this as a clip for the demonstration at the beginning of the video, but as you can see here, it gave me this error message. It was about this display here when the unit dies. So this is really like the last thing that I can mention that we could do. This bug did happen. I was in debug mode from the F11 menu like normal, not from a game developer point of view, and I got this bug. So this is what I'm talking about, that my first release is almost certainly or guaranteed to not be a bugged version from adding in new units. Why this happened exactly, I don't know. It didn't happen again under the same circumstances or almost the same circumstances. I couldn't understand why this happened. happened. I had an advanced AI player selected. One of the siege units that I had selected died, and then it couldn't go to the menu. Anyway, this was the line that the debugger brought me to. And the only thing that makes sense to me to prevent this from happening, or I should say maybe was the cause, but it was the only thing that made sense that would cause this to bug, this line right here, is that the unit owner is like -1 or something. So I don't know for sure. I'm going to save this and X out and call it a day, or at least call it a section for adding in units to the game. If there's any bugs caused from this, I don't know about it. There's, like I said, there's so many moving parts. The only one I saw was what I just showed you. And it only happened one time unexpectedly. So it might be related to some bug with the advanced AI that no one knows about. Or at least I don't know about it. For the time being, I'm going to X out of this and save changes to everything so that we start the last section, which is on the Siege Workshop itself. I would say overall, adding in the Siege Workshop was much more interesting than adding in units. It's kind of a different experience and required more GUI work, of course, but overall I'd say it's very enjoyable, and I hope you enjoy the presentation. I hope I give it justice. First things first, let's add it in so we can see it from the menu. And everything was closed out, because I wanted just to start fresh when I want to add in the Siege Workshop. I'll go ahead and remove KaM Remake. We don't need that. Okay, so I increased this to 29, obviously, and then I added it at the end. Because these are constants and all, if I want to see the changes, I need to first delete and then go for it. In the map editor, you can see it there. And since I have a sawmill in here, if I play this map, I can, well, I can't because I did not build an iron smithy, right? It's interesting, right? Because if I don't need to put the iron mine, but I can just put it for whatever reason, it doesn't matter. But I have to have the building before it, and now all of a sudden, so all that was supported. I didn't have to do anything. And let's see if it's, let me go back to the map editor. If we want to block a building, which we're going to have to do, we have to enable that too, to be able to block. Yeah, that's already supported too. It's not like when you have to block a unit. We had to really do some work for the units. One thing, just seeing that, I'm looking, but if we go ahead and we play this map, and we go to the stats here, it should be by the carpenter, but it's not there yet. So this next change is going to add it to this menu. Yeah, this is the carpenter building row. There's a placeholder for it. Delete. Yeah, now it's there. Already supported pretty much, with that aspect at least. Okay, moving along. This is for when we select the Siege Workshop from within a game, not from within the map editor. They're two different things actually. So we click here, this is what we see, but we want to make it to what I showed at the beginning of the video. And in order to do that, if we click on this building here, the where order row, we have to kind of change this code up a bit. We'll use the code in the module for that, classes and all. Do stuff with it. We have to first add in the extra planks. Like there's only 2 here that's required for any building. It's no more than 2 for the costs of the orders. But if we want to have 5 planks and 5 iron bars for the siege weapons, which we would need it, then we need to do what I'm about to show you. We have to add in some new variables into the class itself that makes the cost row and stuff like that. So we're going to do that and then begin the actual menu here. So these text IDs are not actually text. They are, it says word, but it's not text. It's a number. It's an ID to an image. We have 2, but we want to have a total of 5 for 5 planks or 5 iron bars or both. So you literally have to add in 3 more. And then in procedure down here, we have to use them. We added them at the top, we declared them, but we have to use them here. Alright, so as you can see here, the order in which these icons would appear, these are the original 2. When we add in 3, 4, and 5, it's like that. This is how it would appear in the interface. If we don't use 4 and 3, we would just have 1 and 2. Then we would just need to move 5 over some, and therefore that's why we're subtracting less, because when you subtract more you go more left. So we're subtracting left to move the 5 over, so we have the times 5 version of the user interface for the Siege Workshop menu than for the planks. I'm going to uncomment this later to show you that you can use either this or that depending on what you want to use. But that's the only change we have to make to this module, but I'm going to keep it open because we're going to come back to it later to look at at the 5 plank and 5 iron bar version versus the ×5 version. But this is the main GUI module that we're going to now. A lot of new code for here. This is the bulk of it. For C's workshop support, but all this is new procedures and global variables, global to this module at least. I just put them all in a cluster together, even though these should be reordered down here accordingly, just to make it easy to see what I changed. If I need to make an update to the next version coming up, adding this in, it's faster for me to do this, like this of course. Alright, so the constructor, we create stuff. This is going to be created when you load a map and you play it. It's going to be loaded then. It's not going to be loaded when you start the entire game. And I have Create Siege Workshop. I have my own procedure for that. So it's a special building. Not all the buildings are quote-unquote special, just some, that they have a special interface. All the other ones, the iron armor and iron weapon smithy or the weapons workshop, they share similar interface when you click on them, but these, they have something different about them that they needed to overwrite the default code. They create the panels for every building at the start, and then they will run the code from these special buildings to overwrite at least part of what's there for those. And so we're going to do the same thing for the Siege Workshop, because it is a little different. From the third label above the end, above the create, all the way down, we're going to copy all this in. This is extra code for the 5 plank option, so I'm calling it option 2. All the way to the first line of the market. So that's from here all the way down. Well, it's right here. I mean, so that's how much new code we're adding in. And not all these procedures, like I mentioned for the, when we wanted to block a unit from the map editor, I had all the procedures I added in. They were all clustered together, but if you want to do it properly, like to put things in the proper sections in this module, then you'll have to do it later. But just for simplicity, I'm putting it all in the same place. Okay, so old code is from there. Okay, so it's from here all the way to H store. I'll explain this code because this is new stuff. I have to explain this. But I just want to add it all in first. The game compiles. Alright, new. And I have CMOLA next to everything I changed, so I'm just going to search for CMOLA to know that I'm not skipping over any line of code to explain to you. And I was talking with people in KaM Discord about this, and they were mentioning that it should say the word orders instead of delivers, as I said here. So this is something I added in that I wasn't going to add in, but it's because of KaM himself and Greeny and some other people who are really prominent on there mentioned this, and they all agreed and liked it. So I said, okay, I'll add it in. No big deal. But more work for us. I'm going to skip over this, and as a matter of fact, I'm going to move this. I didn't put everything in order like I wanted to. I'm going to do it now. Maybe we can search for that too. With Control-Shift-F, of course, I'll pull it up. No, it won't. For that, I can just open it manually. It's in the main folder inside of data text. I have to search for all files. And it's the English only. Control F, search for 137. Interestingly, I used Microsoft Excel to parse this so that I could make sure I could renumber all these lines by order and see that there was no ID or index for 138 or 139. And what we want to do is we want to add in text for the word order instead of delivers for the buildings that take orders, weapon orders. And so this is what I did. I only had to add in orders, just one thing. I'm going to overwrite these two and call it a day. This change I make that it's going to say the word orders, like I showed at the beginning of the video, I only wanted to work for English, and I needed to get the current language the user has set. And if you go to the options from within the game open and change the language, this is still going to pick up the change. So that was a pleasant surprise. That's why I added a global variable from at the very beginning in the previous section with the units. I added this global variable. It's just a string that is going to be a 3-letter abbreviation of the language. So I'll put KaM defaults on the far left. But as I said earlier, like when we were looking at the Projectiles module, that I had to use the unit warrior and unit group modules, I did not want to use more than what I had to unnecessarily. Therefore, having that global variable that this module happened to read KaM defaults to my surprise. I did not have to ask it to use that. Let me go to it. I keep talking about it, but I don't go to it. The amount of time it took me to find this and find out where to get the 3-letter abbreviation for the current language, it was just unreal. But I found it. And that's all I have to do. Add that one line of code in because, as I said, uses some module that uses it. Maybe common types or something uses KaM defaults. Oh, it's right there. KaM defaults. I didn't look into why it does, but it's probably some of the constants and all, so it's important that this uses that. But anyway, I don't need any more max out of it. Okay, but once all that's done, I still have to go here. Now this I know I can search for. It will open up this. This corresponds obviously to what I just added in, but I need to have some type of constant to identify it for the future, that if they want to add the orders word for other translations and not just delivers, that they can do that. Okay, so now we're at that point where I want to go back and now explain the code, because let me first just delete and compile and see what happens. The interface should now work. When you click on to add a new siege unit to order it, it's not going to respond yet. We didn't add that code in yet, but the user interface itself should be intact and visible. And when you click on a building, unclick a building, go back and all that, it should work just fine. Yeah, you don't see it in the map editor at all, but let me go ahead and play it. It'll be like I was showed at the beginning of the video. So yeah, this actually causes a error. I don't know if I can get out of it. No, I can't. Let me just not do that again. So we saw that it increased it. It changed to 1. Everything else about it is intact. So all this above here, all this was the same. As you can see, the word orders is here. Let me go and just confirm that. Let me go to options and change the language to something else. It doesn't matter what. And let me go ahead and play that same map again. I click on the Siege Workshop. It says this word here. And then I click on the sawmill and it says the exact same word. So what I was just telling you, that only with the English translation will it work. That's it. That's the only time it's going to work. Otherwise it's going to default to the default word, whatever it was. So back to English. First, what I want to do is just show you how the code works to change it from this to the 5 planks and 5 iron bars instead of this. This is how KaM liked it. I thought about this too, because I know, like, when you click on the sawmill, it has ×2, it looks good and condensed and all, but I thought, I just moved it down here so we don't hear the sound, but I thought that because to be consistent with all the other weapon buildings, they all show more than 1. They don't just say ×2, but for the sawmill it says ×2, and that's not really that much. It's not 5, it's just 2, but they show ×2 here. So I was thinking, you know, maybe I should put ×5. That's why I agreed with it. I thought it was okay, but for the other weapon buildings, they don't have ×2 even when it's ×2. So I wanted to be consistent with that, so I actually first made the 5 plank and the 5 iron bar version just like this, and then I changed it to this one afterwards. So now that you see that this works, let me go ahead and temporarily modify it to show the 5 planks and 5 iron bars. And to do that, it's all here. It's all here. It's just you have to uncomment some and comment others out. So in here at the bottom, we don't have to do anything with the declarations of these text IDs. All we have to do is change 5. That alone is just going to change the spacing. As you can see here, it looks a little bit different. It's not exactly centered. But the main deal is right here. I need to uncomment these. Just everything under option 2 and comment out everything under option 1. Made it simple. Nice and clean. And I also gave the same note here about text ID order for convenience, even though I had it where it actually is. Up here in this module, which is called from the constructor, has some stuff here, and I have a little note that if you want to put in the parentheses ×5, just add +4 to the left. So if you were to just delete a parentheses and then click this, there's an autocomplete here, so first is the panel, then it's left. In other words, you would just add +4 inside for each and one of these if you wanted to have the ×5 with the parentheses, but I just have it without. But regardless, this can stay. It doesn't have to be removed because it's hidden. It's hidden as soon as it's created, and it's going to be revealed or made visible when you click on the building, but when you click on a new building it's going to hide it automatically. That's how they have this interface work, and that's how other GUIs that I've coded before in the past work too. They basically show and hide. That's how it works. But with that done, let's go ahead and take a look at it. Let's see if by doing that simple change, if the 5 planks and 5 iron bars are here. And they are, right? It's just that simple. The spacing between the iron bars and the planks is the same spacing between if you were to click on another weapon building and the space there. I just took a screenshot of it, counted how many pixels was in between each and took that into account accordingly. But the spacing in between the planks and the iron bars here, maybe they can be a little bit closer, but they would be touching if I made them any closer. But it could make this more condensed, but I think this looked the best. So there you have it. And for this mod, I actually might just leave it like that. I prefer that one, honestly, than the ×5. For this mod, I'm going to leave that out. Prom showed interest, but it doesn't matter if he shows interest or not. This is not the official KaM Remake version. If they want to do it, I gave them the code to do it. I gave Ray the code, made it easy for him if he wants to do what Crom likes. But just for me to be consistent with the other weapon buildings, I'm going to keep it like this, actually. But I'll leave this code in. I'm not going to delete it. It works, and it's hidden once it's created. Those ×5 lines, I'm going to leave it in just as is. It doesn't hurt anything, and so forth. Alright, now I'm going to search for CMOLA from top down. I'm going to make a comment about things as I go, hopefully not too much. Protected was already here. I just sandwiched that in between these that I added in because these applied for not being protected and these did, because they're in the same category of what was down here. I'll talk about these later. These are the scroll images that you see in the user interface for the Siege Workshop. There's not really much to say about it. Siege Workshop order row. This is when you click on these. I have just array from 1 to 2, as you can see, because there's only 2 different things you can order, right? But down here, the where order row is from 1 to 4. That's because for the Weapons Workshop, they have 3 different weapons that you can order. For example, that's the one with the most amount of things you can order, obviously, when you know of all the buildings in this game. Why they have 1 through 4, I'm not quite sure. Maybe they made it mod friendly or something to have 1 through 4 instead of 1 through 3, which was the max. Again, with the Weapons Workshop being the one that uses the most. That maybe they wanted to allow for 1 extra one for a new building that may require 4 to make it user friendly. And they have this integrated into different parts of the source code that I was tempted actually just to have 1 through 4 instead of 1 through 2 for mine, just so that it matches with everything else, but it wasn't a big deal to change it, and I think it makes it more clear. And down here they use a loop to initialize all of the different properties for each where order row, as you can see here. But with mine, I hard-coded it in 1 through 2, and they wrote 1 and 2 for certain objects that they wanted to initialize the properties to, somewhere in here also. But let me just go back up and not get ahead of myself. That's all I wanted to say about that, why I have 1 through 2 instead of 1 through 4 like they had. So next, for the cost row costs, they have a cost row that it's just for the word cost. So this is the actual rows that show the cost, what they are. That's why it's cost row costs. And I'm saying ×5s because, as I showed previously, I have ×5 for the wooden planks and for the iron bars. But then also just an icon version to be consistent with the other weapon buildings cost rows. But regardless, I have it named this just one thing. I didn't want to have 2 different objects, one named icons and one named ×5s. The town hall has its own on change, so I made my own too. Why not, right? It doesn't hurt anything. But I could have merged it with the Weapons Workshop just fine. It wouldn't have hurt anything. But anyway, that's all I have to say about that. But for the costs, let's go ahead and take a look at it again. I think we just saw it, that it was these that I showed you earlier. That's for the ×5. What it was is they used 4 of them, that, like for the planks. We can see down here in this procedure, ShowCommonOrders, they have text ID = 0, which is an image, right? This is not text. They use that as a placeholder for nothing, just to space things out. These are for spacing and these are for actual icons. So if, for example, it's the Weapons Workshop that something costs more than 1 resource, then it's going to execute both these if then and else's for that. It's going to execute them both. But for some buildings, it may not execute both. They have 2 set up that if both are true, then it's going to show everything. Alright, so first things first, this create Siege Workshop is only going to be called one time in the constructor. So everything you see here is only being called and executed one time. That's these. So I know what these were from the previous video. That's 549 and 550. I think this might be an optional parameter right here. Yeah, I have it in there, but I don't have it in here, and I didn't use anything different. So it's an optional parameter, but that's what it is. It's the type of image file, and if you just look this up, they have the types. But I don't want to get too distracted. You can look that up yourself. They have it somewhere. It's like 4 or 5 different kinds. The important thing is, as I said in this comment here, that I have 0 and 0 for top and left with these, but I'm going to specify them down below as much as I could. I mean, here I had to put in a left because the left wouldn't work here. If I put dot left down here, it didn't work. So that's why I initialized it here. I wanted to make this 0 like I made the top to make things more consistent with how the code is. But anyway, this is just the position of where they are, obviously. And this is also the position of where they are. You have to declare it. You cannot, like in other languages, like in VBA, you can actually have it like that and not put anything, just have a comma to mark the parameter. You have to actually put something, so I just put 0, okay? Long story short. And if I just come over this and delete this parentheses and click there, we can see with the autocomplete that we have the panel left top, then we have width, and it seemed to be good at 40 for each. So that's the scroll images. Then we come down a little bit and we get to the weapon order buttons. Very, very, very important is this, because it was the hardest thing. I would come here to the weapons workshop, wherever it is, and it would be this whole thing. And I actually went inside of this module here, added some optional parameters, did all kinds of stuff in order to not have it show this at all. I mean, the text doesn't have to be there. It's easy to remove the text, but to not have this at all, this part of the row, it's called, this is a row. Basically, you're taking 2 rows and you're putting them on the same row, so it's kind of counterintuitive to the class objects that they had set here, and I could see why some people might want to resort to making the interface like the schoolhouse, because it's already made. It's easier to make a menu like this than to make it like the original game. It's a simple thing to do, but at the same time, how simple is it? And really what it turned out to be, all you have to do is restrict the width of the row. And when you do that, then you can put it on one line on the same row. I mean, that's easy to do with adjusting the top and the left, but then to have it so that I'm not going to click on it, but that these are clickable. They're not clickable if the row is, like if one row is on top of the other, neither will be clickable. You won't be able to do anything. But if you make the row a fraction of its default width, then you can have 2 rows on the same row, so to speak, and you can click on them. They can each do something. And that was the secret, was this. And I had to use trunc to make it into an integer, but as a habit, I say 0.0 when I want to divide or multiply by something, a single or an extended, and convert it into an integer. And that seemed to work out. It may not be exact because the width of it is invisible, so to speak, but it seemed to work out pretty well. And I have my own on change, which I'll get to soon. When you press the plus or when you press the minus, what happens when you do that? And this is the line of the code that begins to link it with the other part of the game that actually is going to take the orders and consider the orders and so forth. But as you can see here, I put it top down in the order which, if you want to offset one thing, that you offset everything at the same time. And that's something that maybe I can do right now just to show you. If I can X out of the game and see if all of this, everything you see here stays intact if I move the images down. Let's see if it does. If I were just to move it down, so let's say I offset by plus, it has to be by a significant amount. Let's say like by 55 or something. And compile the game and let's see what happens. I haven't done this before, I don't think, but it should work in theory to be able to offset everything down or move it up if they want to move it up. I click on there, look at that. Everything is intact. And it's not like that. And this code here for the default buildings, how they have it, they don't have it like this, but this is how it should be done. And I don't need to be rude or anything, but that's just how it should be done. It's good practice. It's standard to do something like that. When you offset one thing that everything is dependent on, they all go with it. Alright, I just copycatted all of this other code for these, and I hard-coded this in. They're 1 and 2. You only have 2 sets of plus and minuses, and that's it. We already know what these are. Alright, moving down, this is the on change. I'll talk about this later because this ties in with other parts of the game. I'm going to skip that for right now and move down here. This is when we click on the building itself. When we have clicked on another building or deselected everything, then we click on the Siege Workshop, this is what it's going to come up. And when your language is English, it's going to show what I call this new constant here, which is tied to the word orders. Otherwise, it's going to be this. This is all for the Siege Workshop. So when you click on a Siege Workshop in another language, that's what I'm talking about. This has nothing to do with the other kinds of buildings. That's somewhere else that I'll get to soon, where I do the exact same thing. I have the exact same code because I need to, this is only for the Siege Workshop, but what about for the Weapons Workshop and all those? Those need to say orders as well. That's why I have the same exact code, this if then else over there also. But I had to put in this line here, as you can see with show common. It's somewhere down there, you'll find it if you look for it. I can search for this, why not? See where it occurs. It should be, okay, yeah, it's just show common orders. When I made my own show orders for the Siege Workshop, I was not able to have these lines of code, and therefore I added it in here, just copied and pasted. I think there, yeah, it was hard for me to figure out that the top was 90. I thought it was less, and it turned out not to be. That was a pain, but because they're using line here to use as the top offset, they're using line, and they have it in a loop. And they have one function that calls from another. Show common orders is something that's called right here after these are, and they all have line. They all pass line. So to figure out that for the Siege Workshop in particular it needed to be 90 was a little bit of trial and error. But that explains that. Probably more than what you were wanting, but just have to get off my chest. This is for when you click on the, which I can't do here, but this number here that displays this, and we want to show them. And they cannot always be visible because they are in a different place on the screen, especially that I have 2 rows side by side as these are, and they're at a different location on the screen too. These only are shown when I click on the Siege Workshop, but otherwise they're gonna be hidden, and I'm gonna show that soon, that when we get down to it, whenever it comes, I hide a specific amount of stuff that's specific to the Siege Workshop when we're going to show the panels when we click on another building besides the Siege Workshop. Anything else, we're gonna specifically hide stuff. They hide a lot of things that are created for all the buildings in general at the same time, but these are not hidden because I made them myself, so I have to hide them manually over there. Alright, next, this is for if I were to choose a different player, like player 2, and I click this, the color of the bands on the supports for the siege unit, or for here, I don't know what this is, part of the bow of the ballista, changes color. Now it's orange because I clicked on player 2. Player 1, I click on it's red, and so forth. Before, it was like some kind of pink by default. But adding that in is all it takes. I had to go hunt for the code a little bit. I should have even just looked, just dot this to see that flag color is a property, but I just wasn't guessing that flag color was a property for an image like this here. It does make sense. It's good. I'm glad they added it and made it easy, but I just wouldn't have guessed it. Lightness here, this is for when the building is blocked. So I didn't get to this yet, but I'll come back to this later when I add that code in. But basically, lightness equal to 0 is the default lighting. When it's less than 0, it becomes darker. And when it becomes greater than 0, it becomes brighter, too bright that it becomes distorted and all. As bad as or worse than when it's darker. And it's very sensitive that you have to adjust it by decimals, not whole integers. This is the plank row. This is where the word cost itself is. And it's going to be centered for all of the other buildings the same. So I didn't have to worry about that. You see the word orders here, and I changed it there. It's the same, it moved down, but it's the same horizontal alignment. So I didn't have to worry about adding in dot left. Dot top was enough. And I want to show it because, and show the specific one for the Siege Workshop because I selected it. But for the cost row, by default, what I want to do, because I had the plank option down here that I don't want any words, I didn't want to have any words written for it at all. I wanted to make them all equal to nothing. And I guess here I'll explain the time 5s because it's part of, and I will temporarily uncomment it out even though that I'm going to comment it right back. But this is the word catapult, and the other one similar is the word ballista. It's converted into every language, every translation. That's why I took advantage of these constants, obviously. And then where that word is. By default, it seems like the horizontal alignment is good based on how the other building's set up, but if they changed how the other buildings are set up, then this is going to be affected by it, unfortunately. But I could have been more responsible and hard-coded it in, too, to have the left, so that if they do something to the other buildings, it won't affect the Siege Workshop, but whatever. Then I have, for the ×5, which you don't see right now, but I have the timber icon, as you can see, for the far left. Like if I come back up here, this is why I have this here for the order for you to visualize. This is a plank, and then we have 4 and 3 as nothing, and then we have 1 as the iron bar, and then we have the last one as nothing for spacing. We're going to put text in there, the ×5, separately. And we do that up here when we unhide these cost rows. This text is going to say how much it is. There are 2 different things that you put on the same row. One is an image, one is text. And so therefore this is the image aspect of it. Up there is the text aspect. Again, this is for the ×5 and all, but that's all there really is to explain. And here's where I make them visible. Those rows, when I create them in this procedure here, which is called by the constructor just once, it creates them and then it hides it. But when we click on the Siege Workshop, then it's going to reveal them here. But only if it's option 1. The ×5 stuff is only going to reveal if it is option 1. But right now I'm just going to remove it. Now we come down here for me to explain this. It's very simple. We have 5 planks, and we have 5 iron bars, and we have one for every single slot, 1 through 5. I have them in order 1 through 5, but that's not the order in which they are. I should have it 5, 4, 3, 1, 2 for left to right if I wanted the exact order they would show, so just keep that in mind for those who didn't know. But this right here is going to say where they're all top aligned, okay? And this is just another property where it's going to honor wherever this is specified. That's how they're aligned. And I have 4 of them, not just 2, because we have 2 different siege weapons. So this is the ballista and this is the catapult. As you can see, very self-explanatory. This code is very easy. Alright, so now we're on to the market. So now I need to move down. I need to go to the next seed mola, wherever that is. That's way down here. This is for what I was just mentioning. It's kind of a big function or procedure to show the game house. So lots of stuff going on here. Didn't change anything in it until the C-Mola part, obviously. This is where I was just mentioning before that I hide things. This is the scroll images to hide them and to hide the cost rows because they're different. They're not aligned horizontally or vertically like the Weapons Workshop is. Like if you click on the Weapons Workshop and you click on the Armory Workshop, even though this has its own special page, the rows are in the exact same place, so they didn't have to worry about that. At least I didn't think so. I don't think when I look at it like this too, right? They're all identical. All I had to worry about was hiding the extra row for the Weapons Workshop that's not in the Armor Smithy, for example. But not a completely different part of the screen and all that I have to hide that for the Siege Workshop for showing a building in general. So this is actually what's first called before that procedure that I was just showing you is called for the Siege Workshop. This is called first. So things are hidden. Even if I want to show the Siege Workshop, I hide things first and I unhide it after. So it's kind of counterproductive, but it's productive for every other building, obviously. Very easy, simple stuff to understand. So I go to the next. It's a little bit down. It's in the same procedure. They have a case of here for Siege Workshop. This is where we call that I was showing earlier, just before this. And I just went with passing these same variables because they were down here. I just put them on one line, and they show common demand and common output because the Siege Workshop does share the same thing. All this was originally here. I didn't have to add any of this in at all. All these buttons up here, everything you see, code up here takes care of all that. So I didn't have to take care of any of that. All I had to do was be careful to just rewrite these lines here and then call that special thing for the bottom half of the display starting from orders on down. Everything below it I did not change. I wanted to keep this clean and at least as intrusive as possible. And I think I accomplished that. Alright, let's see. We're on line 936. Let's see what else we have. This is where we show common orders. This function is called from the previous one above it. It was one of those three. So for other buildings, we want to, if it's English, we want to show the word orders. So when you click on this, it says orders. It's not the Siege Workshop, but it is another building that takes orders. So all of them that have orders, it shows the word orders as KaM and then requested. But then here, this is going to say delivers instead. Only works like that with English. I already explained how to get this from something else, briefly showed it how to do it at least. That we don't have to use another module to get it. We just use this global variable in KaM defaults and that takes care of it. Okay, and that's really all I did was just this one if then and else. I can finally go back to this right here. So this is the next step in implementing the Siege Workshop in. We have the menu, but as soon as we click on a plus or something, we can't do anything with it. It's going to crash the game. It's going to increase it. When we say resume application, which says it increases it. Resources are automatically delivered into here. I don't know how it does that or why it chooses 5 instead of more. We have more space for more if we wanted to add more. Don't know anything about that. Didn't look, didn't need to. Okay, this is a new section, I guess. This is starting to get into more of the core code that links the Siege Workshop to everything besides the user interface. Okay, so from here, which is where I left off in the previous part, I just borrowed this line of code from the on change for ShowCommon. It's there. If you find it, you'll see it. And this too, this is also there, and also 1 through 4. Alright, this is an interjection. I said 1 through 4, and I'm going to say it again several more times before I finally figure out that it was 1 through 2. And I cannot explain how it worked with 1 through 4 and why it changed it, because I remember I had it at 1 through 2. Maybe I changed this later on and I didn't check it. I left it at 1 through 4, that it no longer worked at 1 through 4, but that has to be it. So just everything else I'm going to say in this section and henceforth until I say it's a 2, it still applies. It's just that should be a 2 instead of a 4 because I changed this later on. I put this in earlier in interface game when I wanted to block siege units, as you probably saw, and that is an array of 0 to 1. So if you have a loop through an index of 2 or 3, it's just going to go out of bounds. It's going to go out of range of the array. But anyway, this is also basically a copy of that line 2, except for I have it but named the Siege Workshop order row instead. So I didn't come up with that code. But I did come up with this though. I have to get back to this later when we enable blocking either the catapult or the ballista or both. But it makes no sense. Why don't you just block the whole building? Why don't you just block the Siege Workshop, which we could have done from the very beginning when we first added to the menu. But we added in block unit earlier on when we were doing the unit section, right? We did that. We could block the catapult or the ballista, but this is for when we block a unit, it's going to not change, increase or decrease the number. It's just going to stay 0. It's not going to really respond, but you can click on it. It won't crash the game. That's the important thing. All right, so game input process. This is another project that I had when I first put in the Siege Workshop into. And I made 3 bookmarks in here because this is what game input process is for us, for our purposes. This is it. This is the one that it calls command house. So we're going to take a look at make command. So make command is the first one it calls in. It takes in, and as we can see here, it takes in, well, this is the type. It's not really the main parameters. This is the 3 parameters. The H is the house, as in the house ID. And I made these comments here. They weren't here before, okay? This is to let you know what they were, but that's actually what H is when it gets passed here. It's the house ID, and that's why it's an integer, right? It's not a type. It's not a type of house. It's not TKM house. It's an integer. Basically, you can study this yourself. All I wanted to show you was this. That was my job, to show you that this is where it is. It's in this module. So this is make command. Now we need to go see what take command is, and that would be up here. It has to be. There's only 3 things in here. Well, it's execute command. Anyway, the important thing is this. This is very important. This is what is going to, if you would look up source house, you can just control F. It's a TKM house. So in a module with TKM house, a quick shortcut to do that, if you just say control shift F with that highlighted, and then just put space equals, that's how you find a class very quickly, just to let you know how to find things quickly like that. And it's here, so this is the module, KaM houses, obviously, but maybe it's not so obvious for other things, so I want to mention it. So it's TKMHouse.WhereOrder. So if I go ahead and find WhereOrder may be a property that reads from getWhereOrder. Oh, it's down here. It's a property. Okay, this does read from getWhereOrder, but it also here it says write setWhereOrder. WhereOrder reads from the cumulative WhereOrder. That's all this does. It accesses this variable. So WhereOrder here, it takes it to fWhereOrder. fWhereOrder, it's the current status of the WhereOrder for the building. The game keeps track of it, right? That's what fWhereOrder is, but WhereOrder, just plain WhereOrder, is the current change of WhereOrder. This right here is params2. They have params 0, 1, 2. Those were the three that I showed earlier, that it takes in three things. We can see from here that this is the value. It's going to be the third one, so it's 0, 1, 2. And so that's the current or the change in the WhereOrder that it's going to add to the cumulative WhereOrder of the building. And it's going to assign it to the cumulative WhereOrder of the building. I know it's kind of a cheap explanation. It's not a full explanation as much as I understand, to be honest with you. But anyway, that's all we need to know. Long story short, I had these bookmarks in this other project of mine so that I could explain this to you, what this does. So I hope you got something from that and it makes sense. But that's all you need to understand if you want to see what this is. But this is kind of connects this module here with KaM houses, and it does it through here. What we're going to do next is PickOrder. PickOrder is going to make the building decide, make the carpenter decide or the blacksmith decide which order he's going to pick. If he has an order for each weapon that he makes, just to do it in the same order that it did in the original game, and then it goes top to bottom until one is complete, then it skips over that and then still goes top to bottom and skips as needed. I will come back to this. I'm going to need this because I want to get to the lightness. Let me look for it if I don't know where it is. Lightness. It's not a case sensitive. Okay, I'll leave it here. I'm going to come back to this when we get to making the blocked units tie in with the Siege Workshop. Okay, so now we're going to move on to PickOrder. So this is what happens when GameInputProcess does its thing somewhere along the line. I don't know exactly how, but just trial and error and testing it led me to the conclusion that this is somewhere close along the lines of what happens next. Alright, PickOrder. It's in KaM houses. It's where I was just showing you earlier about trying to explain the GameInputProcess. So this right here, if we test it in the game, go and make an order in the Siege Workshop, it shouldn't crash the game anymore. Oh, this should be a 2. That's why it crashed the game. So I modified that. When I give you the source code, it's going to be a 2 instead. The reason why this was a rain check error because of this Siege Workshop order, which I established here in interface game as 0 through 1. But here, it was 1 through 4, and that will go outside of the bounds of the array. But anyway, as I say here, it's the if statement. It's just this extra code here. All this is code that was there before for all the other buildings to take orders, and then they have a second bit that both the Siege Workshop and the previous order buildings will be able to work with. The main reason why I have this bit of code here just for the Siege Workshop, it's a long story, but you can't have a new weapon and also have a new unit. They can't be the same thing. You have to choose which one you want, and obviously we want to have unit. So I had to use some resource just to get it to order, and we'll see soon that I chose to use I actually originally chose to have trunks for catapults and stones for ballista, but when I wanted to add in AI support, especially I think for the advanced AI, it requires an actual weapon type that I just changed it to be a crossbow for catapult and bow for ballista. So the warfare cost array right here, that's pretty much the reason why I had to make my own code block for this to bypass that. I have this line as they had this line, and this line does not apply because the wares for the Siege Workshop don't stay in the house. They walk out through the garage, right? The Siege weapons, as soon as they're created, there's no reason for backup that you would say that the weapons workshop is going to stop working when it's full of weapons. Even if it has more order to make, it's going to stop when it's full. Not at all applicable to the Siege Workshop. But then these right here just don't apply because it just makes no sense. There's no official where or resource type that the Siege Workshop is supposed to be making that has any meaning. You can assign him to make any resource, and I'm going to do it later. I'm going to show you that I use the crossbow and the bow. But it could be any resource if you weren't adding advanced AI and possibly classical AI support of the Siege Workshop. If it was just for humans to use and not the AI at all, then you could get away with trunk and stone, as I mentioned. So these are out, but the rest of the lines here correspond and so forth. And for that, I just hard-coded this in that the amount of the ware that needs to be input is iron and timber. And I looked at the scripting language. If you want to count the total amount of resource in a house, you have to add in the ware in and the ware out. And that's why I have that. So you can read this as the total of iron bars in the house is equal to 5 and the total number of wood planks in the house is equal to 5. That it's full of what it needs. And if so, we're going to take the order and break. And it's 0 through 1 because there's only 2 things we can order. It starts from 0. That's just the way it goes. And it's going to keep track of what the last order was here. It's going to assign it to whatever this is, which is determined from here. That's how it keeps track of it. This is something just like the where order. This is the last order produced. It's just which weapon was ordered last. So that's all I really added in, and that's all I had to add in. Down here, if an order was made, then you just decrease the where order, which is the cumulative where order in the building, and this is to whether or not to display the message that the order was completed. But in this case it won't be because it decreased it. It's working on at least this could be the last order. Whether or not there's another order doesn't matter. We don't display that message just yet. We have to get that the result is equal to 0 and then display it, which would be this case here, obviously. But this is just one place where it's counting on having 1 through 4 instead of just 1 through 2, like what I mentioned earlier. I know it says here 1 through 2 and it only checks that and it's fine. Where order is something to do with this module. It has nothing to do with what we have set up in GUI Gamehouse. 1 through 4 may be assigned and we're only going to be using 1 and 2, but it'll be assigned in this module. 3 and 4 will always be 0 therefore. And I guess that's why it turns out that I didn't need to do anything with this code. I could reuse this code for the Siege Workshop as it is used for the other weapon order buildings. That's really all I have to say about it. I was just mentioning a thing about wares, how we could choose anywhere we wanted technically, and then this is next. Right here, the output is crossbow and bow. This was there already, I didn't put these in. So I'm going to go ahead and find this. This is going to be the major one. Just like res units was when we were adding units, now res houses is going to be for when we add a house. Maybe I could just search for this. This is definitely unique. Unique meaning 1. So you see that was already there. That's why we couldn't build the Siege Workshop earlier or place or whatever unless we put the iron smithy. It was already here. All of this was here. This will dictate where the door is, right? And I have some comments here. I'll come back to this later. But in addition, what I want to do right now just to knock it out is workshop check. I guess I call this KaM economy. I guess it's going to be used somewhere. If not, it doesn't hurt anything to add it in. But now I have to get into the sprites. The process was similar to this. As I showed at the beginning of the video, the Siege Workshop I have is identical to the original game. I had to slow down the remake a little bit so that you could see the two Siege Workshops are exactly the same. They work the exact same time, have the same number of rounds that he's hammering and he's sawing, and etc. But in order to do that, I made this spreadsheet here where I went frame by frame. Like, we go to export house animations, not the HD, just this one, and we go to it. They have 3 different work folders, and when I try to get these in sequence from, and I guess I have to show it because of this comment here, that if we go to find plan, I'm not going to do anything with this at the moment, but come here and I go down. This is the same code that I showed in this video here when we wanted to get the video timings, that I said that the video times, the seconds per run, etc. are determined by how many frames that you allow in the animation. And we come down here where Carpenter is, that's where we would need to add the Siege Workshop. I'm not going to add at this moment in time, but basically what I wanted to show you was this, that HA work 2, 3, 4. I tried different combinations of these work folder names here for the Siege Workshop, and none of them matched the animations from the original game. And certainly when I multiplied them by some number, and this doesn't have to be a whole number, and actually what I'm going to do turns out it's not going to be a whole number. It's tricky the way I had to do it. I can hide these headings for right now so we can see, but I zoomed in as close as I could, which is this much, into Microsoft Excel. So I used that same script that I showed in the previous video with inserting the sprites into Excel, and then I could sort from there. So I inserted all 3 of these folders, these work folders worth of sprites. I removed their masks because I didn't need them for this. The game is automatically going to access them just as it did for the sprite arrays that I did for the units. It's going to do this exact same thing for this too. But as you can see, the left column is what happens first, and you go down, and then when it ends, then it comes up to the top of the next column, and then it goes down, and this is the sequence of him working and so forth. So I went frame by frame with that video player that I have, Media Player Classic, that I've been showing clips of the original game in. And this, for example, means that for 3 ticks, means that a flag moves, or you see a villager like a surf walk or something, but he's staying still during that time for 3 frames. That's how this starts off, with this specific frame. For 3 ticks he's there like that, and then it changes, and then it's going to change in the next frame to this one, but then it's going to last for 3 frames before it changes to this one. So that's what these 1s and 3s here represent. But I went into that much detail to make sure that this corresponds exactly to the original game, that the Siege Workshop you have here is authentic, just like the Siege weapons. Let me zoom out some and show you what I did, because I figured out it was difficult for me to figure out the sequence and find this pattern. Not really difficult, but it was time consuming. To the right here, these are actually part of the original files. This is a list of maybe HA Work 3. It was the largest one. That's 15 items. Work 2 was the shortest. 4 was, yeah, I guess these are the same length. I think they're the same thing. You know that? That's what it is. Work 3 and 4 are the exact same sprites. Yeah, that's it. I did this like a week ago, so I don't remember. That's why I only had 2 columns of stuff here. And this was HA Work 2. I just copied and pasted these here in sequence that I saw it appear, and I realized at a certain point that, as you can see with column C, D, E, F, all these, they all are the same exact thing. It's when he's sawing and hammering, But he starts out a little different, and then the last one, he gets cut off after a certain point. So out through this blue, as you can see, all the colors correspond, and it's the same exact sequence repeated until we get to here that it's a little bit different at the end. And here, even I have a column for how many ticks each of these frames lasted. I probably you can see this is the only 2, the rest of them are 1. And since it was repetitive, that's why I have C here, and then D, it looks different. It looks like this is wider than the rest of them, but that's really what's going on, is that I have a column that says how many ticks each of the frames were, and I just copied and pasted this, assumed it was the same for the rest of them. So that's my mistake. I didn't check every single one of these frames, but this is about 90 seconds worth of frames. It's quite a bit. It took me over an hour to observe all frames and to verify that this does repeat exactly this many times, and it is exactly the same sequence for every single cycle that he saws and hammers. It should be obvious that it was that way. I actually went through and made sure that it was. So the point I'm trying to make here is I gathered all of these frames, but before I get to that, I need to first start off some variables inside of ResHouses to get this going, and then I'll come back to this to run it, and I'll show you what I did. I didn't go by folder numbers and all that, because just you know, like, how in the world there's 15 plus 7? Well, it's really 30 plus 7, so 37 total. How do you repeat it? Because as you can see in this sequence here, if we look at the row numbers for one cycle of him hammering and sawing, how it's actually executed in the original game is 76 frames, but we'll only have a total of 37. How can we repeat that to mimic this? We can't. we have to make our own custom HA work folder, so to speak, and that's exactly what I did in order to mimic this. And I could have went with like HA work 1 and then HA work 2 repeated 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 times, and then HA work 3 for a final, something like that. Or I could have broke this down into HA work 1, and then this is HA work 1 again, and this is actually repeated of this. I have these in different shades, but the color of the font is purple. That's what you can see. So this is repeated 1, 2, 3 times, and then this is repeated just once, and then this is repeated 1, 2, 3, 4 times, and then this is a new one. So you could sit here and do something like this. This is really what it comes down to. But this didn't work for me. I don't know exactly why. It has something to do with it ran out of space because this building runs too long, I guess. I don't know. The longest running building is the armor smithy, which is about 45 seconds, in the coal mine too. They run a long time, but this runs twice as long. That it's, for some reason it threw it off. I cannot explain it, but you don't need to do that. All you need to do is just make all of it not like this and this sequence. That would be the sequence, okay? And these are the frames. If you want to know, there it is, but I'm not going to include this in the source code, but that's what it would have to be if we were to follow the convention that they have here. I made it all one folder, all one array with every single one of these frames. That's the only way I could get it to work. Now to extract these, I opened up a new sheet, but I did some calculations with the original game that I'll get to in a little bit after I do this to explain why I added some additional zeros at the end of this sequence to make that pause that he disappears completely. 0, as you may have recalled from before, is when a frame or a sprite shows nothing. It's invisible. That's why I added zeros for when he's not there at all. He's finished sawing and hammering, and it's a break in between when he sits back down and then the siege unit walks out of the siege workshop. But anyway, I copied these two columns, one column for the sprite IDs and then one column for how many ticks the sprite ID lasted for in the original game. Copied it and I went to a new sheet, pasted it here, and this is Excel, so you have the option to not paste the images. I don't want to do that. And then I did that for all of them. So for this one that I repeated 8 times, so I'll just make sure to count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. There's a 9th one, but it doesn't repeat all the way. But I just came down here and copied this. Then came here and pasted it. 1 values. And so from this point I can just copy this because I don't want to keep converting into values and click anywhere and press Control Shift down. And then, so that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Okay, and I went down to the bottom on the last one because we have to add more. But this one, I'm going to, instead of copying from here, just through the blue, I'm after these numbers here, the number of ticks the frames lasted. And I have to do the same thing, remove the formatting and Control Shift down here, and then finally come back and get this. So I'll provide this in the video description so that you have it. And I just copied this. It wasn't that many at all, but it was a different sequence. It was not repeated. It wasn't any one of the previous ones at all. And he gets cut off when he's hammering. Before he gets out of view, you don't see him anymore. Pasted that. Okay, so from this point, I went to the beginning, and this is Excel, so we look at the formula bar here, equals, and I had the formula copied ahead of time, but this formula means to repeat this many times. And then I copied this down because I want to get a sequence of IDs, and some of them are repeated, obviously. And this is a quick way to do it, especially if you're using Excel or Google Sheets even, they'll have that too. And I made a new file in Notepad++ and pasted it in. And I see I want to put all of these on a different line, so I replaced the commas with \r\n. That's a new line with extended on. Replace all and get that. I have extra spaces here. I want to replace 2 new lines with just 1 to get rid of those. And just do it one more time, it doesn't matter. Okay. So I copied this and I went to a new sheet, pasted it in. I can control shift down to see how many I have. So this is the number of seconds, 76.9 seconds. I observed from looking at the original game that there's a pause between when he disappears and when he starts to saw. And then at the very end, after his last hammer, there's a pause before he reappears, and then there's a pause before the siege unit comes out. So there's additional things that I have to take care of besides the main sequence of sawing and hammering. Turns out I need to have a total of 19 zeros after the last frame. So one more, 19. But a long story short, it took some experimentation for me to get this amount to produce the result that I showed you at the beginning of the video when I showed a side-by-side comparison. That at the beginning, I need to add 2 zeros. And it was trial and error, so I'm glad I made this here. I'm going to use this next, but this is Microsoft Excel VBA window. If you press Ctrl G, then you get the immediate window, it's called, and you just run this code. And it's going to convert this column into this, which I'm going to cut just for right now, paste into here temporarily, and I'm going to remove these commas. So I'll get back to this soon. I couldn't hard code a 1D array with all of these in it inside of Delphi 12. It was complaining that it was too long and it wouldn't let me do it, so I had to make a 2D array and initialize it at the top of the module that I'm going to put it in and so forth. So I'll leave it at that with this and all, and now get into res units. At the beginning, I need to have some variables declared for the 2D array, and that's this one. We were at isWorkshop, now here, the declaration of these variables and ResHouses. Go to the beginning. We go through armor smithy. Okay, it's in now. I'm going to delete and not quite compile yet. Let me get the rest of the code. 2 integers. They don't have to be integers, but I just put integer, whatever. That's actually down here. It's kind of confusing because a constructor is a method, but then they have a procedure inside of a method, or a procedure inside of a procedure, basically. Alright, next. I say here that these subarrays have a length of 30, and really only this one needs to have a length of 30. The rest of them doesn't really matter what the length is, and the only reason why this one needs to have a length of 30 is because later on I'm going to make this more dynamic by referencing the length of this one. Because 30 is the maximum cycle length, like what I was talking about in the previous video and probably in this one too, about the maximum frames in animations. I therefore just, because I'm referencing the length of this one, have them be a length of 30, but it's just for looks, I guess. It's a little bit wider than the screen that you can see, but not that much wider, and so that wouldn't have too many subarrays. And then down here is code to, well, this line right here, well, this is to make a house action quote-unquote folder for the Siege Workshop that didn't exist before because it only had work 2, 3, and 4. There was no work 1, and I did this on purpose because I want to show that this works, that I'm not using, by any chance am I using the default system that they had for these. Not saying that it's bad, it's just that it didn't work for this building, at least the way I did it. And the remainder of the code is to merge all of these into a new array, which I am naming this. And I also, as I do that, I'm going to count how many total elements there are in the array. This is a global variable inside of this module because I referenced this in some other modules. This is the 1D array and the 2D array, which 0 through 26. So this is the only thing you have to really hard code in or change. The rest of it is dynamic. If you use the script here, it's going to generate this code. If you make your own building or want to change how the Siege Workshop works, you just would put all of the frame IDs in one column, in column A inside of Microsoft Excel, and then you have this open with this sheet selected, invisible, whatever you want to think of it as, and it's going to process that when you click on this and put the new code here. You just delete these. I'm just kind of repeating myself a little bit, and you copy this and paste it down here. And I had to do this over and over and over again. That's why I'm mentioning that when I was experimenting with putting zeros in front here to represent that delay of when the carpenter first begins to work, but he's not actually starting to saw yet, but he disappears. And then delay here in which he disappears after he's finished working. There's more to it actually in RenderPool, which I'll get to soon, that we have to handle the end of it when he reappears, but it's before when the catapult comes out or the ballista comes out. And that's because all the frames you see here is not all the frames that are actually rendered by the game. There's going to be some extra beyond this. It goes beyond this a little bit. That may be because this last subarray is not 30, and so the remainder, whatever it is going to be still attempted to be animated. And I just used an if condition inside of RenderPool to take care of that. Maybe I could have made it 30 also here and it would have been fine, but this is just how I did it. Doesn't bother me. But again, that's all this is. It's just the subarrays. This line right here to establish the length. All this code is inside of a constructor, so it's not going to be executed but just one time. So this double for loop here is not really a big deal. And again, it's dynamic. If you change this at all, then you don't have to change anything else except for you have to change this to like 25 if you remove a subarray, or to 27 if you add a subarray, and so forth. So that's all there is to it for ResHouses, for the custom array. So instead of putting these in the pool like I did with the custom arrays for the units to walk, work, and die, I'm just putting these here. And this module right here is used by another module which is going to use sound. So I'll talk about that soon too, because we have to put in the hammer and saw sound. And so this was a really good module to put these in, especially the variables up here. I put them way up here outside of protected, or private I should say, so that they can be accessed from other modules that would use this and that do use this. I didn't make them use this, they use it by default, which is my whole goal, right? I didn't want a module to use another module unless I absolutely had to do that, which I did in Projectiles, but only there. Alright, but let's go to Unit Work Plan. This is the carpenter, so down here is the baker. This is how I chose to do it to make things easy. Copy the baker in this end and insert. As you can see here, I use sub action add as I showed in this video here towards the end. So it's past where I told you to watch it to get up to speed to compile KaM Remake. I talk about that towards the end. I don't know exactly where, but maybe not exactly at the end, but definitely in the second half of the video on how this works. But because this does not have to be an integer, that really helped me to get this precise. I'm really happy that KaM and Lewin put it together this way. It could be of type single. Really helped. They used it with some buildings, I think, but not all of them. Most of them they have just an integer. But I don't know. I really don't know if at this point when I see something like this, if the other buildings are right, if they are the exact same time or even remotely close to what it was in the original game. I have no idea. Probably so, but I'm just surprised that the HA work folders could be used in sequence like this, and it was that simple and it worked. Maybe the Siege Workshop was because it was so long that the original game developers just had it like this and used special code like I did to execute it. I have no idea. But just note that I have an else here. This is an else if from this end. It continues on because this is all the carpenter. That's how they have all these end, else, if, end, else, if. And at the beginning, they have a line of code, which I have here, and also here. Depends on the product being produced, which, because they have 3 weapons workshops, this is all the weapons workshop. Mine is condensed. It's 2 different things, but it's in this amount of code, because I didn't need to have a full sequence like this expressed with a for loop and all to represent one work cycle. I made it just one HA work, and I used their option here to put a number in, the number of times it repeats, so to speak, as a single. And it's not really the number of times it repeats anymore. This has to deal with the total amount of time that the building is to run. But it is dependent on this. It's confusing. But what I was trying to say is if the product is a crossbow, it's going to be the catapult. And regardless of it's the catapult or the ballista, this is how they had it before, that you just put in the resources that it costs and then the resource that it produces. And then I have the sequence of IDs, which I have just HA work 1 that I established here in ResHouses because this little trick didn't work for one reason or another, that I just ended with this, and I was lucky to be able to do this. This times 1.0 is to convert to a single because high of this is 30. This is just 30. I could have put in 30 here, but I wanted to make it as dynamic as possible. Once you get something like this, and you get the full sequence, use a little script like this, split it up into a 2D array so that you can express it. I don't think any building is going to run longer than the Siege Workshop. It's just ridiculously long. There's a limitation on the number of frames that can be animated, and that's 30. So what do? You have to use the system that they have here. This right here is a variable that is in ResHouses too. So I guess I should explain that now, that we were to copy this and just search it here. It's right there. Well, it's at the beginning here that I can, and I have a little note here that we can access it from other modules. That's why I have it along with these outside of private and up here at the very top of the module, but in here I have a 3 that this was repeated for 3 ticks. He was stuck here for 3 ticks. That takes this into account, the total number of frames, not just the distinct frames in the animation, the full building cycle. Yeah, it's a mouthful. This is quite a bit, but this is what I did to make this work, and it's a general process that you can use, like I said, to make a building and add a new building yourself. All that I got was these IDs that were already in the Siege Workshop folder, okay, but I had to sort them all and put them in sequence. Basically, I had to do everything except make these sprites, but ResHouses was a great place to put them because the pool uses ResHouses. Interestingly, it does, and so does another module for the sounds. They both use this, so I put this here instead of in the pool, just to have it in one place. But anyway, back to this. That's the total number of frames, including repeated ones, divided by 30, basically. And by doing this, it was just experimentation. I can't really explain exactly how this works to my liking, but it did time it correctly by doing this. A total number of frames divided by 30, which is the max number of frames that can be animated, and that worked. And this line right here was just something that they had on all the other lines. So that's basically this code in a nutshell. This worked for me, and it'll work for you too. So at this point, I can open up the game. We're not going to see the animation, but we should see a delay, him disappear at least for that amount of time that I showed at the beginning of the video. Right now he has no orders. Let me just, for the time being, block it so that when I place an order, serfs don't come and block the view. Okay, he disappeared at 14 seconds. And he came back, and I timed it, and we'll see that soon when I time it, but I want to get all the animation and the sound and everything in, and then at the very end I'm going to time it so that when you use a build ratio tool like mine, you can add that in, or when you do your own calculations, you can see what times you need to build buildings and how long he has to run to produce a certain amount, etc. Just like all the other buildings, but this one was unknown, but I'm going to make it known to you. We didn't see him do anything, so let's go ahead and go to the pool and add that in next, the animations. This is where it gets used. This one is much more sophisticated than the pool for units. Okay, this is an interjection. I actually didn't have the code like this originally, where I mentioned just a little while ago that I'm going to have an if condition in here, that's the if condition, to handle the end of the animation where the carpenter has finished going through his sawing and hammering sequence. And then the end of the second to last and then the last subarrays, zeros, is going to handle when there's that pause and it looks like he has vacated the house. But this is actually going to continue that. So I could have maybe added 12 more zeros to the sequence. Maybe it's a cleaner way to do it. But I spent enough time on this. Just with trial and error, I saw that this worked. So that's for more zeros, but then otherwise, if it gets past that, then make the ID equal to this. I don't know why it would surpass this amount. Maybe it involves the same thing as why I had to add in this, but whatever the case may be, this 1685 is when he's idle and he's just facing that direction. It's not necessarily just because it's the smallest number here, that's the first frame in the animation, but it happened to be that way. So to conclude this interjection, this is really all that's changed since what I'm about to show you. So if I keep showing it over and over again and you don't see this, this is in the source code, you have it, but this is the latest addition I made to make my Siege Workshop fully mirror that of the original games, as you saw in that video clip comparison at the beginning of this video. And I was very appreciative of this, to be able to interpolate, because Like if you look at the steps, if you would log this using my write to file, it repeats the same step like 10 times, or let's say I think it's 8 times, something like that. So it's not like the res units that if you would log that, it would be one for one. It would count them in continuous order, no repeats, but this one does. So I'm kind of confused by this, but they have this here that interpolates so that it's continuous regardless of it being like that. It makes up for it. I know they have some variable at the top. You could get the total number of steps like it was the res units one. I think it's F counter. Could be wrong, but I think it's F counter. But the problem with F counter is it's the total number of runs that the building has done, the total number of steps that the building has run, period. That was the problem. It was just one counter that I couldn't use it. There's no way I could have used it to, if they didn't have this interpolation, I could have used it here. It may not make much sense, but if you play with this some, you'll know what I'm talking about. That's all I can say. But this is the default code that was here. As we can see at the top, before the corner X thing, I just wrote the then and else and all that, each on one line. That's what they had before, so I put all this inside the else begin. So if the condition that I have set here is not true, then it's going to execute the original code. But if the condition I have is true, which is the Siege Workshop, and it's the action type is equal to HA work 1, which is the only one for when the Siege Workshop is working, right? That's what we set in unit work plan. I only use HA work 1. It's like a joke. I just use it for the timing of the building to run, and based on the timing for the building to run, which is controlled from here, which you can think is directly related to the frames and all, because of that, and I'm using that to identify how long the building runs. In the pool, I'm going to refer to that too, because that indicates that the building is running, period. But it's in of itself, no frames are actually assigned to HA work 1. As you can see here, I'm referencing my array to take care of that instead. Just like I used my arrays for the units, I didn't use the arrays that they had set for the unit animations at all, except for this time when I used them for the walking, but for the dying and for the attacking, I didn't use them at all. So this is a little bit confusing. You have to sit there and think about it for a few minutes or maybe longer to figure this out, how I did this, but that's pretty much it. I mean, so if it's a Siege Workshop and if the action is HA work 1, so the action can be for a flag moving, which has nothing to do with the building working, etc. Something on the building that moves, which would be the flag. And him idle too, that's another one. The unit idle sitting there. And also, of course, when they put in the resources, so in this case the iron bars and the wooden planks, all that stuff. Those are all different animations for buildings. But this is all we care about, so that's why I have that filter. Otherwise, it's just going to do the default for the house. So it doesn't matter if it's a Siege Workshop or not. If it's not the specific action for working, this code is going to be executed for the Siege Workshop too for all other animations. I don't want you to get confused about that. There's an and here. Okay, so with all that said and done, I'll go ahead and start the game, and we're going to see that he works. We can see him work. But it's going to be silent. There is no sounds yet. Yeah, wonderful, right? Great. Okay, so the next item is the sounds. If I go here, that's in houses, but I'm just going to put it in here. Anyway, I already have it open. Scroll down. I wish it was this simple. But since I wanted to have it like this, like the original game, have it have certain number of ticks with the same frame, just as it was in the original game, then a simple modulus or step equals or step in this or that or in a certain set and so forth, I wish it would have worked, but it didn't. I had to do this instead. So it's all gone. Okay, I left this +1 in here, and this +1 and this +1. Okay, that's how I'm looking at this. All this first chunk here is for the saw. This is for the hammer. Frame 1, 2, and 3, where the one in the middle is the frame when the sound begins, frame ID number. And the ones before it and after are just extra things to use to check if the time is right, because 1693 is when he starts to saw. Okay, that's wonderful, that's great. But the problem is it hits 1693 multiple times in the cycle. The sound for the saw is not able to last that long before it hits it again. So you have to know specifically which occurrence of 693 is the correct one to start the saw sound. And I got lucky actually to see that it should be 1695 before and 1691 after. That's the correct 1693. It's going to be this one, this 1693 here, but it's not going to be this 1693, but it will be this one, right? It's not every single 1693. You can observe that for yourself, but it was kind of confusing that I couldn't get it exactly right. It was offset when I figured that out, that it should be this 1693, but when I just offset all of the work anti-steps by +1 I should say, then it worked. It was the exact thing I needed. So I left in the +1 in all of these so that you can see, but this was just work anti-step. The middle one is just work anti-step is equal to 1693. That's when the saw begins, but I had to offset it by 1, so that's what that +1 is there. And this one, it was the previous frame from that must be equal to 1695. That's what that -1 is. And then the frame after this should be 1691. That's how you read this. And then after all of that, then I offset it by 1 animation step in order for the sound to be exactly right. If I would increase this by 1 period and all of them by 1, it would be off, or it would go out of bounds of the array that I made in ResHouses. And therefore that's why I had to do it this way. So the saw was confusing, but the hammer was a little bit more straightforward. I didn't have to do that offset. The hammer, all I had to know was that the animation had to be on 1705, and the one before it had to be 1707, the one after had to be 1706. Alright, so if we go ahead and we start the game now, we'll hear the sound and everything just as I showed in the beginning of the video. Alright, now with the sound done, let's go ahead and produce the siege units with it, right? That's the next thing. When he's done, what happens? Nothing's going to happen. Well, I mean, at this point, we can see what happens. It should produce the weapon, right? It should produce a crossbow and a bow. Like right now, it should make a crossbow. There's the crossbow. And here for the bow. And it doesn't show it in the building at all, right? It doesn't show it in the interface at all that it's there. But you see it pulls it right out. Just as we specified here, right? That's where you would put what resource will come out the building. So I'm going to search for this. I added some variables at the beginning here, specifically for a unit, not a unit type, an actual unit. Okay. And then later on in this same function, I guess we can look for this or this, it doesn't matter. I don't know why it jumps like that. It's weird. It's like you search and it's like, no, it doesn't exist. Okay, all this replace with that. All right, now this is a mouthful too. It's really cool though. I mean, I think it's starting to get a little fun because we're getting close to the end of integrating the Siege Workshop in, and this is pretty interesting. The way I did it's not very intrusive at all, and I don't rely on their system very much at all that they have here, which, you know, could be a good thing and a bad thing. I mean, a good thing as in it's not going to rely on the original format from the files that the game pulls from the original game, all the original buildings. So if you want to add new buildings in, you have a system here that I'm presenting for you. If you can just extrapolate some, it should be a doable thing, be very dynamic. Maybe this is what King Dairon did. I have no idea. I never looked at his source code. I know he had to provide it. I just refused to look at it. Even though I was tempted to, I didn't. And I didn't have anyone else's source code to look at. All this I just did on my own. But anyway, okay. As you can see, these lines right here, I didn't touch. They are the same. Homed out, wear out. So I was going to bypass this, but the game is going to crash if you don't let it output the resource it was supposed to output, okay? Just let it do it. Let it put that crossbow and the bow out. Whichever one it makes, of course. Whichever one you ordered. You have to let it put it out. But then as soon as you do, then you're going to remove it. You can remove it before it even adds it to the game stats menu for resources produced. This is before that even happens. But right after, I mean, you catch it right in time, right here. So we start with this, of course. And you have to look around to know that home is the house in question and all that. You have to look at context clues to figure that out. But once you do, and you get the house type, and you know it's a Siege Workshop, then we begin this. Otherwise, we're going to execute the code that was there before. And that's these lines here. So that's how I broke it up, because we have to, even if it's a Siege Workshop and we're doing what we're about to do, we have to let it put out the resource no matter what. We have to do it. Otherwise the game is going to crash. I have lots of comments here you can read, but basically I added this in because of previous code I saw. I thought it was a good idea to add that in, that check, to make sure that the house exists. But this is where we take the produced where out immediately, and there's only one bow or crossbow produced, and we want to put false here to say that this action was not done by a script. And you can see here, this is where I got this code for this. Actually, that's why I thought it was a good idea. I got it from that scripting actions procedure. If the product that we removed was the crossbow, then we're going to train a catapult. Otherwise, we know it was the ballista. There's no other choice. The way we set up things here, it's either a crossbow or the bow. And we go back to ResHouses. This is where I said I was going to come back to earlier. Now we're here at that point. So I have these comments here that crossbow is the catapult, the bow is the ballista, and I have them here. So this is very important that this corresponds with this. And then also at least that you have one of them here as a check for the product produced. So that's very important to have them connected like that. And I got this from, I think, the file in the barracks or maybe town hall, something like that. I got this code for it. But siege unit trained is what I defined above as the TKM unit. I had to put it of that type in order to access this action, so to speak. For right now though, I'm going to make it invisible, make this unit invisible that was created, because I want there to be a delay from when he's visible. Just based on the timing when he comes out of the garage, we need to make him invisible right now. And I'm going to make him visible soon in the next module that I'm going to be looking at. But this is something we have to do. We have to, it says action go in. It's kind of crazy. I think even when you kill a unit or a unit dies, set action go in is used. It's like when you want to halt a unit, like I mentioned in the previous video, you don't actually halt the unit. You have to walk nowhere in order to halt. So this is like to come out or go in is action go in. Or to die, it's action go in. That's what it takes to reuse code. So be it. And this is, as it says, this is for game stats. So for example, I can comment this out just for the time being and we can see everything else. And I can make this so that the unit is visible just for right now. And let's observe it create a siege unit and it comes out and all that stuff. Let's make a ballista. Let me move this one up and not confuse anything. Get confused, right?
Yes?
Okay, this right here we have to take care of. So this is, if we just follow this, it comes here. This is actually something I have to take care of next. I guess this code is here where it says so far because they were going to add in the Siege Workshop, but they hadn't yet. So there you go. I did it. So there you go. Now recompile this and do that again. I'm just going to lower the volume. We don't need to hear that anymore. And I'm going to block it so that the serfs don't come. So we can see how it comes out, that it's not ideal. It's not like how it showed in the beginning of the video. See, it's going to come from over here. You'll see it. It like pops out, you know, it just jerks. And then it appears. Okay, that's one thing I wanted to show you. Another thing though is that when I X out of this, it's going to say soldiers equipped 0. Alright, this still counts as a soldier, but it says 0. But this is just a line that I found from either the barracks or somewhere that that's what it's for. Either it said it in a comment or I figured it out one way or another. So I'm going to run it again, do the exact same thing, and just show you that this one line of code fixes that. Get ready to quit. Okay, there you go. Soldiers equipped 1. So let's take care of that jerk now. I have to make him invisible when he wants to come out, when he's on the left side, that it's actually by the door, because with the Siege Workshop the door is on the left. It's not like any other 3x2 house. But now I need to reveal him but somewhere else at a delayed time. And that's here. So this is very self-explanatory. And you have to see from context clues that F house is the TKM house and that F unit is the TKM unit. Then you can check to see that if it's a siege unit type, then make it visible. Otherwise, because we could have serfs, we could have carpenters, possibly laborers when they're around the house for construction or just idle or whatever. I don't think if a unit is visible and you command it to be visible, when it's already visible, something's going to happen, but it's just one less action that's done unnecessarily. Again, block it so that the serfs don't come, because it has to be 10 serfs to deliver. It's crazy how much resources they cost. You just won't see anything. Just slowly. Perfect, right? Perfect. It wasn't over there and jerked. Then came out, it just came right out of the garage. So we had to first make it invisible when it was created, then after a certain point make it visible. This was luck. I don't even know how I figured this out. Now that the Siege Workshop is done, well, we didn't integrate it into the AI yet and other parts of the game yet for the AI to consider and for winning missions and all. But if we view it in the map editor as I am doing now, you can see this here, that when I click on it, it shows crossbows and longbows. This is something that we don't want to see, because in the schoolhouse, for example, which is a building that trains units, or for the town hall, they're not going to show what they produce. If they're a unit producing building, they're just not going to do it. But all the other buildings, they look identical. If they don't produce a unit, they're going to look the same in the map editor itself. So I have a line of code, well, really an if condition, so it's a few lines of code that's going to remove this from the Siege Workshop view when we view the map editor. So I'm going to X out of this and first take care of that, and then I'm going to come back in the map editor to revisit a previous topic. So we search for this. So right here, all of this. Basically, this is the only new code here. And at this point, if you understood the previous code, this should be a piece of cake to understand. Let's just check it. And while we're there, we're going to look at something else. Alright, so when we click on it, it's gone. It wasn't there originally when we first added it in. It wasn't there, the bow and the crossbow, but since we officially added in for ResHouses, I believe that's where it was that it would add it in, then we had to remove it after it was added in. There was no resource that it produced for it to show. But now if we go to block units, that's something we did at the very beginning. We added this in and all, but we didn't see it actually work because we didn't have the Siege Workshop. But let's say I were to block the ballista and would start this game. I have to save it. Now all of a sudden we see this, right? And you click this, nothing happens. Neither one, nothing's gonna happen. But this one, we're free to click it and so forth. So it's not like with the schoolhouse that it completely disables these buttons. I could do that too, but I don't know. I think it's good enough the way it is. And the reason why it dims it the way it does and why it doesn't work is, well, we have to go back to here. It doesn't let you do anything because this is where on change would be. It's not going to let you do anything because of this line right here. We're going to use this line again for blocked, that it's not going to allow the AI when we integrate this into the AI, the Siege Workshop. The line of code is a little bit different. This dot hand is not there for that, but it is here because this has to do with the map editor. But I mentioned this earlier, but that's why I have this line here. And for the dimming, that was this, the negative 0.62. I figured it was close enough to when we were to block a unit like the Rebel, which I have in this map, to compare the two. It's a similar dimness, and therefore that's why I kept it the way it was. Alright, so that takes care of everything to do with the map editor. As far as I know, is complete. Now we can go ahead and I could time the building. Maybe I can do that first before I get to the AI. And in order to do that, I can come up here and I copied this code ahead of time. This is just code to time the building. This is not official code to use for the game itself, of course. But I go to KaM defaults and I can uncomment this. And then above here I'll put this log procedure and I'll clear that stuff. And it looks like I'm going to have to include game params because that's not included here. So just temporarily. And before I do, DCU needs to go. And then one last thing here, and if the resource is acquired here, I'm going to assign ticks per run to equal 0 to reset it. And I actually should put it down here after this, just by trial and error, just to get a consistent number. And I modified the map so that there's no building running except for this one to make it clear. I'm going to place order of 10 and just fast forward it real quick. Alright, I get these numbers. So just to find the difference between them, very basic equation or formula, just say this minus this, and then Control D to copy it down, and then there we go, it's 86.8 seconds. I originally said on KaM Discord that it was 88.3 seconds, but as I showed earlier, I changed my mind and added these zeros in the beginning, and then I removed some extra ones that I had at the end, that it took off the overall time. But as you saw at the beginning of the video, my Siege Workshop matches the original games. So there you have it, 86.8 seconds. So I'll comment this code out to time it. That's the only one in this module, but if I come here and I need to comment these out and this one. That's why I had in the variable here in KaM defaults, because that's a module which both of them use, and so that global variable can be updated with no issues like that. Okay, the next step, add AI support that they can, number one, build the Siege Workshop, and then two, make orders for Siege weapons. And we're going to be careful to limit the number of Siege Workshops and Siege units that they can make, primarily to protect them, that their economy doesn't get destroyed, that they can still make iron armored troops. We just want to have a couple Siege units, just for looks, basically. But they will be effective. They will still use them like they do any other unit. They still will use them. First, I guess I'm going to be looking at the classical AI. It's not very much work at all. The advanced AI has more instances when it refers to the Siege Workshop, but as far as building Siege Workshops and placing weapon orders, it's the same. And as you saw in the beginning of the video that this worked, I'm just going to show you the code. And you really could just do this yourself, but I'm going to search for this. This is classical, not advanced. Weapon orders are here. I first need to put in this in the loop actually. So I added a new variable, the carpenter for TKM unit, because I want to check if he's idle or not. Because when I place an order, if he's not idle and I place an order, then he might, and he will in many cases that I've tested, he's going to create an extra siege unit more than necessary, maybe even one of each more than necessary. But if we want to have no more than a certain number of siege units created, we want to make sure that the order is placed when he's idle, and we count the number of each siege unit type that the player has at that moment in time before we set an order, because he can take off with the order in no time. And I could move that down. This is just to place the orders, but not the building itself. I'm going to go to that right now. There's two steps to do that. One is to put which buildings to build this in between. That's how the classical AI is set up. When it wants to build a building, it's going to search, and if it's possible, it's going to put them between these buildings, I guess. But now we need to actually trigger the AI to build it when it's ready. It's going to build it when it's ready. It's not like the advanced AI that is going to be very responsive to the time that you allow it to, or you give it permission to first start to try to build it. The classical AI is going to do whenever it can, but not immediately unless it's in really good shape. This is the big one, this module here. Okay, towards the bottom. Okay, so this case of here, or I should, okay, this is a for loop, but it is a case of also. It's going to go through the weapons count. Now the problem with this is the weapons are the crossbow and the bow, and that's already taken care of by the weaponsmithy, of course, and therefore it's going to be a conflict of interest if you were to try to put it in this case of statement because they're here. It's not going to let you do it. It's going to say this is already in here, you know. So I just put it outside of the for loop in general because it works. Just with trial and error, it seemed to work, and it seems logical, and so forth. This right here is the first instance that we're seeing this. That is in KaM defaults. I have it set to 1 for the classical AI as well as the advanced AI. We only want them to build one Siege Workshop just for looks, primarily to show off the Siege units and Siege Workshops in the game. And all this means is it's going to create an extra iron mine, and then from that point it may or may not, it just depends on the economy. It's just so many things, but it may may create another iron smithy. It creates too many iron smithies actually. It like creates 1 for 1, and you just need 3-to-2 ratio for that. If you study the timings of the buildings, the iron mines run at 43 seconds, the iron smithy runs at 31, so it's almost a 3-to-2 ratio. And I said steel armor, I don't really think it matters that much as long as it has something to do with iron weapons or armor. Just something to trigger this to happen. The idea is it's not going to disrupt the economy very much. With the limits that we set here, especially that it's only going to make 1 Siege Workshop and it's only going to make 2 tops of each unit. So for the classical, that should be pointing here, just this. But as we've seen here with the weapon orders, I didn't mention it, but if the building has a worker and he is idle and the unit is not locked, so this doesn't contain the hand and then dot locks, it's just dot locks. This is something that I looked at in nearby code to figure this out for it to work, but you can see in the source code here, because it's cut off on the screen, max catapults alive at any given time, and it's very simple math, right? You just say the total that it can be minus the current total. And I guess to be safe, because there could be existing units already, this is I guess a mistake I made. We may not want to try to assign a negative amount. I'll go ahead and compile this and play a map like Eruption or something and make sure that it's the classical AI when I play it, and let's see if they build it. Okay, here's the Siege Workshop for this player at 1 hour and 4 minutes. This is player 2, we can see that. It's not going to set an order unless he's in the house. That's one of the conditions we had, so there we go. There's the order. Unless the house has a worker, right? That's what I just mentioned. We're just waiting for that, but it just may never come, or at least for a long time, you know. That's the thing. If I go to another player and take a look at it to see if it is created, if one has created a Siege Workshop, chances are the others are too, and this one has 3, so maybe he can create it before, but you can see the order. He will create it if he gets supplied, that is. Okay, this player is making player 4. He's making one. He's already made a catapult, it looks like, because it's in sequence. They go catapult, ballista, right? Yeah, there's his catapult. So you can see it works, right? And he will join it with a group that he's creating accordingly and use it, battle as needed. Just taking a look at the stats here, only 1 Siege Workshop and only an order of 2, and then after that it's over. Alright, I'm going to do the exact same thing for the advanced AI. I'll start with the weapon orders and then go from there. First of all, we have to add in the Siege Workshop, right? Because it's filtered out here if not. So I guess there's 3 items in here, not just 2. For the variables, we're going to add a carpenter, just like we did before with the classical. And down here, that we're going to replace with all of this. So this is the default order that it's going to do should that not be there. So it's going to constantly, it jumps around. It's going to keep reordering over and over and over again. It's not like the classical that sets it once or every so often. This one is going to refresh very often, and it's going to assign like 25. And then what I'm adding in now is going to set it down to 2. So it's going to go 25 to 25 to 25 to. Therefore, instead of letting this execute, this assigns the orders. Okay, this is that line that assigns the orders. And I have it twice. This should not be here. It should just be like that. And it's identical to the other code pretty much, except for now we're going to have max advanced AI, and I need to, just like before, if they start with initial catapults and or ballistas that is more than the minimum amount that we're allowing, then this is going to be resulting in a negative amount, and we don't want that. Okay, weapons done. Now let's go ahead and add the Siege Workshop itself. 2 occurrences of this, huh? Both in City Builder. Okay, that's a commented one out. Okay, I'm like, what? I'll search for this. So all of this needs to go. So the way this works is I guess this could be changed. I could put a constant for it that we can change it. I guess I could do that. But the classical AI, you really have no control over the minimum minute. So I could say min Siege Workshop build, let's say build minute equals, and let's say 53 like I have it now, and put that here. So that's it for AI support as far as building and training the siege units. We can observe the advanced AI and fast forward to like 53 minutes, which is what is currently set at, and any map, I guess, Eruption will do. We're past 53 minutes now, and still no Siege Workshop. At least I don't see it. There's a spot though right there. Oh, and we can't specify what buildings, or at least I don't know how to specify what buildings, but this could be it. Oh yeah, that's it, player 2. Yep, there it is. So it's a little bit later. He placed the order of 2 and only 2. It doesn't jump around like I mentioned it would if we didn't pay attention. Almost ready to build one. There we go. And you can see while he's working it clears, but then it comes back. So that's how it works, unfortunately. That I guess it's AI, so it doesn't really matter. You're not going to be selecting the AI player normally, but let's see if he uses this catapult for anything. Oh, he has the catapult too. Yeah, the advanced AI drives me crazy. They just keep going back and forth, back and forth. But anyway, you can see it works. This final section will be some more AI support. The remainder of the replacements just looks like lists like this. So I'll cut it short and tell you just to look to the source code at the rest of them and do the replacements as needed. There are 2 what I call classical AI supports for identifying enemies, where you just add the Siege Workshop to the list that are there, and then there are 6 of the same kind of thing for the advanced AI. So I'm not going to spend time going through this for no reason. You're going to have to do this anyway, and I don't really have anything else to say about it except that I went and found lists with these specific buildings in them, or some combination of maybe watchtowers in it once in a while, and then just added the Siege Workshop to it at the end. But this is an important one for everybody, because as you can see here, this is to identify the Siege Workshop as an important building. The town hall, the barracks, the school, they all have something in common. They all create units, not weapons or resources. So it kind of made sense, like it should be there with the standard mission win condition. So for example, with this added in,
I'm listening. Yes, sir. Gladly.
and so there you have it. I mean, wow, this was very involved, and this video is very long. This is probably the longest video that I've had on my channel so far, and probably that I'll ever have. Well, maybe my build order tool, whenever I get to it, I might have a video that's longer, especially if I don't split up into several videos. I'm kind of disappointed in myself that I failed to check the maximum range of the siege units, that they are actually the same as the other ranged units. Put that into my first mod and published it. That was embarrassing. Not to mention that my catapults were really imbalanced, especially when they're in numbers. But at this point, I can definitely say that they are much more authentic than they were even in that video now, because I did that. And I really hope that you learned something from this, and if you made it this far, I can declare you a champ. If you have any questions about this, it's very unlikely I'll be able to answer them, because I pretty much shared everything that I know inside this video. But anyway, thank you for watching, but I hope you didn't watch this all in one sitting, and have a nice day.